Chapter 165. The frenzied impact began at this moment. It was no longer the impact of spatial energy, but the 7 halos that Nian Bing emitted from his body. The 7 types of magical elements brought the fused spiritual force back into his body through the Tian Yen acupoint, following the meridians to every corner of Nian Bing's body, and then completely returning to the Tian Yen acupoint. The halos condensed towards the center of the Tian Yen acupoint. Nian Bing regained consciousness. He didn't know what had happened, but he was very clear that although his spiritual force had collapsed, it didn't disappear, and returned to the Tian Yen acupoint at the same time as his magical force. With a flash of light, Nian Bing only felt his body lighten, and he appeared in another world. His surroundings were pitch black, and the rumbling of thunder was deafening. A gust of wind blew, stimulating his body like knives. Unfortunately, the sudden appearance of the wind was far less oppressive than the spatial transmission magic. Nian Bing could easily resist it with just his body. The air was a bit cold, and Nian Bing didn't have the energy to observe his surroundings at this time. He sat on the ground and assumed a meditative posture. His mind was completely focused on the Tian Yen acupoint between his eyebrows, feeling the 7-colored light fill it. The vast Tian Yen acupoint had completely turned into 7 colors at this time, and the 7 halos gathered in different directions, attacking the center of the Tian Yen acupoint at the same time. Nian Bing heard 7 clear sounds, and the 7-colored light flashed. His 7 divine blades drilled out of the spatial ring and stabbed into the ground around his body. The 7-colored halos formed a colorful light shield that surrounded Nian Bing, constantly stimulating his body. The 7 gems emitted a dazzling light, and the 7 types of magical elements were constantly baptizing Nian Bing's Tian Yen acupoint. With each impact, the 7 types of energy in the Tian Yen acupoint would be more powerful. A golden red figure lit up, and a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s appeared beside Nian Bing. His fiery red hair was draped over his back, and his simple and resolute face showed a bit of fatigue. But when he opened his eyes, his body emitted a layer of invisible energy, and no matter how the storm blew, it couldn't get within 3 feet of his body. At this time, his sunlight completely fell on Nian Bing's body, and his mind went from the outside to the inside, feeling the changes in Nian Bing at this time. After a short while, the middle-aged man's expression changed, and he muttered to himself, "Destruction and establishment, what a good destruction and establishment! I didn't expect him to be able to produce such a strange situation. It seems that the ultimate Tian Yen acupoint will bring me a great surprise. Nian Bing, you have finally stepped into the forest of the strong. What a good magician of the same origin of ice and fire." After a long time, Nian Bing slowly woke up from his meditative state. His body didn't feel anything, and was still as lifeless as before, but his spiritual world had undergone a tremendous change. At this time, the Tian Yen acupoint was like a starry sky, filled with bright stars. Among them, the 7 main stars were the largest, and each of their colors represented a different element of magic. And around them, there were also many small light spots of the same element, slowly revolving around the 7 main stars like a vortex. Among them, the red and blue star clusters were revolving around each other, and these 2 main stars were also the largest, and the other 5 star clusters were revolving around the 2 star clusters in the center. The 7 star clusters formed a harmonious space, filling the entire domain of the Tian Yen acupoint, and Nian Bing's spiritual power was condensed at the centermost point of the red and blue star clusters. That was a golden light spot, only a single light spot, but it condensed all of Nian Bing's spiritual power and soul. Through the perception of his soul, Nian Bing could easily feel any slight change in the Tian Yen acupoint. Not only the 7 main stars, he could also completely control the light spots scattered around him. Every light spot contained a large amount of magic energy, which was completely compressed magic elements, mixed with a large amount of spiritual power. It seemed that every light spot was a point of Nian Bing's spiritual power, and as long as he willed it, everything was under his control. Nian Bing slowly opened his eyes, and the world around him became so wonderful in front of him. It was not only the characteristics of the scenery that he could clearly see, but he could also see what kind of energy was contained in a stone, and what proportion each kind of energy occupied in the stone. A clear judgment flashed by, and it was already imprinted in the depths of his mind. The cold was still, and his body was still, but when Nian Bing floated up from the ground, he knew that he had become different. Even he himself did not understand what had happened, but he knew that his Tian Yen acupoint had not evolved to the ultimate, but had a strange mutation. This mutation was formed under various subtle circumstances, and he did not know what specific ability it had. Collecting his somewhat excited mind, Nian Bing looked around, and it was dark all around. He looked up at the sky, and large amounts of dark clouds blocked the sunlight. Occasionally there would be flashes of light, and inevitably there would be rumbling thunder. The amount of magic elements in the air was no different from the Yangon continent, but the magic elements here were much more violent. If he wanted to use the magic elements here to cast a spell, he would need to use at least 3 times more magic power than on the Yangon continent. Moreover, the magic elements here changed very quickly, and if he wanted to condense the magic elements needed, he would need to pay more. Around him was a valley, and there were only various kinds of gray and brown boulders. Most of the boulders were uneven and extremely weathered. As far as the eye could see, the surrounding environment was like his own body, and it was completely silent. The wind seemed to be calmer than when he first arrived here, but the wind here was very strange. Every gust of wind seemed to be condensed together, and once it blew on his body, it would cause a feeling of impact. If it was a normal person, he was afraid that this wind would be fatal. The continent of God should really be called the continent of hell. "You're awake." A low voice sounded, and it was as if it was in his ears. The sudden appearance of the voice startled Ling Yanbing, and the power of the will in the Tian Yen acupoint quickly changed, and everything around him became clear. Through the fluctuation of the voice, Nian Bing's forehead lit up, and a silver eye floated open. The silver eye was not completely silver-like before, but in the center of the silver eye was a crystal-like eyeball. The crystal and transparent eye faintly had a layer of 7-colored halo. The lustrous light flashed, and Nian Bing's body floated to the side, and his power of the will had already locked onto the source of the voice. What a strong power of will! Break and then rebuild. It seems that you have discovered more changes in the Tian Yen acupoint. In the midst of the gratified voice, a golden-red light flashed, and a tall figure appeared in front of Nian Bing. It was the middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s. A gray robe was draped over his body, and his noble and dignified aura was condensed and did not dissipate, giving people a feeling of worship. Nian Bing observed the dragon god with his spiritual power. The dragon god in front of him was like a pure ball of fire, a pure heavenly fire. When his spiritual power approached the protective range of the dragon god's body, it would immediately be blocked by a massive amount of energy. He could only feel how powerful the dragon god was. That unfathomable feeling deeply affected Nian Bing's heart. That was practically endless energy. Nian Bing thanked Senior Dragon God for the guidance. He respectfully bent down and deeply saluted the dragon god. There was a faint smile on his face, and the Tian Yen acupoint closed by itself. The dragon god nodded to him and said, "Not bad, the inspiration and progress you got in the space transmission magic array this time is much greater than I thought. If your vitality can really be restored, then your future will be limitless. Now the spiritual power in your Tian Yen acupoint is like a bomb, but it lacks a fuse to ignite it." Nian Bing nodded and said, "You are referring to the innate qi. Indeed, the opening and growth of the 7 major acupoints seem to have a lot to do with the innate qi." The dragon god said, "Yes, the innate qi is the foundation of the 7 acupoints. However, there is an exception among the 7 acupoints, and that is the Tian-Yen acupoint. The Tian-Yen acupoint is the only one that does not completely rely on the innate qi to form. It needs more spiritual power. The innate qi is just a catalyst. The other 6 acupoints are exactly the opposite. The spiritual power is the catalyst, and the innate qi is the foundation. When you first used the ancestral curse of life, and were close to death, the 7 dragon kings called my spiritual power. At that time, I told them that if one day you can come to the continent of gods, I will help you open one of the 6 acupoints as a reward for you. But now, I can't fulfill this promise, because your body can't open the acupoints at all. Introducing you to that great true God Senior is truly a blessing in disguise. Nian Bing said sincerely, Senior, the dragons have already helped me a lot. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I would have died long ago. No matter the result of this trip, I only have gratitude to the dragons. There is not much difference between a disaster and a blessing. No matter what, I have to try. For my family and lover, even if there is only a glimmer of hope, I have to recover my life. The dragon god nodded and said, Well, then let's go now. The continent of gods is very small, not even as big as a country in the Yangon continent. The continent of gods is divided into 2 parts. One is the place where the ordinary gods and the main gods like us live. According to the division of strength, those who have not opened their acupoints are called gods. Those who have opened 1 acupoint are called demigods. Those who have opened 2 acupoints are called gods. Those who have opened more than 3 acupoints are called us main gods. Although the dragons do not have acupoints, since the appearance of the gods on the continent of gods, the dragon god is one of the main gods. Above the main gods are the 4 true gods who no one knows how powerful they are. The senior I want to take you to see is one of the 4 true gods, the one who calls himself the god of life, Cow. As soon as the dragon god's voice fell, a golden red light lit up and surrounded Nian Bing. With a flash of light, they rose into the sky like a meteor. As soon as they left the ground, Nian Bing immediately felt that the energy of the outside world was constantly changing. All kinds of violent energy were unevenly distributed in the space. A strange scene appeared in front of his eyes. Some places were blowing with biting cold wind, some places were hailstones, and some places, flames were constantly spewing out of the ground, and magma was flowing everywhere. At first glance, there was almost no place on the ground below that was calm. The dragon god flew like lightning in a certain direction as he said to Nian Bing, The place you were just at is known as the Pure Land on the continent of God. It's a place where no energy can wreak havoc. All the gods on the continent of God below the prime god level live in the Pure Land, and there are very few Pure Land on the continent of God. There are even fewer Pure Land on the continent of God. Perhaps you can't imagine, but gods often fight over a drop of clean water without impurities. On this continent, there are always dangers that the people of the Yangon continent can't imagine. The slightest carelessness will immediately bring about a fatal disaster. On the continent of gods, it is generally divided into 2 parts. 4/5 of the places are like this, and the remaining 1/5 forms the 4 forbidden areas of the continent of gods. Even the main gods don't dare to enter these forbidden areas, because there is a true god living in each forbidden area. No one dares to offend the dignity of a true god. Nian Bing said with a wry smile, It's really a hellish world. I'm afraid that even if I haven't lost my vitality, it would be very difficult to survive on this continent. The dragon god said, That's true. Although the great war of the gods caused the lost country to completely disappear, the continent of gods also suffered a devastating blow. The gods here can only struggle for survival. The dragon god's flying speed was extremely fast, and the scenery under his feet passed by like an illusion. In the blink of an eye, Nian Bing saw a layer of faint white light in the distance, like a cloud blocking the way forward. It was the first time that Nian Bing had seen such a huge wall-like cloud and mist. Just as he was about to ask the dragon god's speed had already slowed down. He floated down and stopped on a mountain rock. Just as Nian Bing was about to ask, the spirit in his Tian, an acupoint, suddenly moved. He subconsciously jumped forward, and a green figure flashed past his previous position. At that moment, with the help of his Tian, an acupoint, Nian Bing could see clearly that it was a lizard-like creature about 3 feet long. Its whole body was covered with green scales. Its body was thin and small, but its speed was extremely fast. Its head occupied almost half of its body. In just a flash, it had already moved to the side. A pair of big black eyes emitted a greedy brilliance as it stared at Nian Bing and the dragon god. The dragon god didn't seem to feel the existence of the creature. His whole body was emitting a golden red light. His eyes were looking at the layer of opaque white mist in front of him, and his mouth was constantly emitting a low dragon roar. The green lizard missed its target and almost didn't stop at all. Its thick limbs exerted force, and like an arrow, it once again shot towards Nian Bing. Obviously, it didn't dare to attack the dragon god, who was emitting a golden red light. Nian Bing didn't dodge this time. He raised his right hand and his spiritual force spread out, forming an invisible net that covered the space within 3 feet around him. The trajectory of the lizard's forward rush was easily grasped by him. He could no longer use magic, but the strength of his body had reached another height. Under the effect of his spiritual force, seeing the lizard in front of him, he slightly leaned to one side and straightened his palm like a knife, directly chopping at the joint between the lizard's head and body. The tyrannical body brought Nian Bing extremely fast speed and the strength of his attack. With a muffled bang, the lizard's body was suddenly chopped. The lizard's forward momentum suddenly changed. It rolled on the ground and jumped up again. Nian Bing felt that his palm, which could easily split a boulder, didn't bring any harm to it. Just when Nian Bing was shocked, the lizard had already rushed up again. Unfortunately, although its speed was fast, Nian Bing completely judged its attack route by relying on the exquisite analysis of his Tian Yen acupoint. As long as it attacked him, he would immediately use the strength of his body to send it flying with a palm. However, the lizard's body was also extremely strong. It was hit several times by Nian Bing in succession, but it didn't suffer any harm. It just kept attacking Nian Bing in anger. Nian Bing also thought of taking out his own magic blade to kill the lizard, but through the observation of his spiritual force, he found that the energy of the lizard was not very strong. If he had to use a magic blade to deal with such a creature, wouldn't it be too ridiculous? His competitive spirit rose spontaneously. Nian Bing's spiritual force suddenly increased by a large margin. He was ready to use his newly learned attack method to deal with the lizard. The energy of his Tian Yen acupoint was fully opened. The lizard had become a mass of green energy in his eyes, and in the center of this green energy, there seemed to be a small mass of red. The moment Nian Bing's spiritual force appeared, a layer of faint light of 7 shadows enveloped Nian Bing's body. The Tian Yen acupoint suddenly lit up. In the next moment, the flying lizard suddenly stopped. It was actually forcefully locked down by Nian Bing's spiritual force. It couldn't even struggle. Immediately after, the Tian Yen acupoint between Nian Bing's eyebrows lit up again. The lizard had already turned into a rain of blood. Nian Bing waved his right hand, and a little red light in the rain of blood was drawn into his hand. It was a small piece of sparkling and soft thing. It looked transparent like a gem, but it was not as hard as a gem. Suddenly, an impulse to devour blood rose in his heart. Without much hesitation, he threw the small piece of crystal straight into his mouth. The crystal turned into a warm current and entered Nian Bing's body. After the crystal entered his stomach, his body, which was originally full of death energy, suddenly felt very comfortable. Nian Bing's eyes suddenly turned red, full of evil aura. His whole body, which was full of death, also lit up with a layer of dark red light. Soon, the light faded, and he clearly felt that his strength seemed to have increased again. His body moved. He had returned to the dragon god's side, and his speed had increased a little. The feeling of devouring blood disappeared. Nian Bing's brain quickly turned. The lizard just now was obviously a creature on the continent of gods. Why did he feel that his strength had increased after eating the crystal in its body? Could it be that these crystals were supplements? While he was thinking, the golden red light on the dragon god's body had converged. He took a deep breath and said with a smile, "Senior has allowed us to enter." "Nian Bing, why did you eat the green lizard's magic core? As long as that thing is exposed to the wind, it will gradually become hard and turn into an ordinary gem. Can it be eaten?" Nian Bing froze for a moment, then said, "Senior Dragon God, after I killed the lizard with my spiritual force just now, I just felt a little annoyed in my heart. It seemed that I would only feel comfortable after eating that thing." The Dragon God took a deep look at Nian Bing, sighed, and said, "This is the problem left behind by the zombie technique. You are now a zombie, and every once in a while you will have the feeling of wanting to suck blood. Perhaps it is because of this. Well, let's go in first." As he said that, he waved his right hand, and a golden light appeared in his palm. The golden light seemed to be alive, constantly flickering and making a slight sound. The dragon god's eyes flashed, and he injected his energy into the golden red light. The golden light turned into an arrow, and suddenly drilled into the white fog in front of him. Suddenly, a layer of golden luster appeared on the white fog. The golden light slowly spread out, forming the shape of a door. The white fog inside the golden light suddenly became much thinner. The dragon god Nian Bing nodded and led him towards the golden door. When passing through the golden door, Nian Bing suddenly felt an itch all over her body. Many tiny energy dots drilled directly into her body. That was the energy full of life aura. Silence dissipated when it came into contact with the death aura on her body. Thinking of the title of the god of life, Nian Bing's heart couldn't help but heat up. The white fog looked like a thin layer from the outside, but when they really came in, Nian Bing discovered that this seemingly thin layer of white fog was actually more than 10 feet thick. The further in they went, the stronger the aura of life became. When they passed through the white fog under the protection of the golden light, the scenery in front of them suddenly changed. There were no dark clouds in the sky, and the blue sky was as clear as a mirror. Looking up at the sky, one's heart was wide open. The explosive magic elements in the air disappeared. The magic elements here were much stronger than outside, but also much softer. Looking around, there was nothing but green in front of them. All kinds of strange flowers and grasses, accompanied by the sound of insects and birds, weaved a moving picture scroll. Not far away, a layer of water vapor pervaded the air, and a clear lake was calmly in the center of the plants. The lake was so clear that one could see the bottom, like a huge blue crystal inlaid in the ground. In the center of the lake there was a huge banyan tree. The banyan tree was so thick that even 10 people couldn't wrap their arms around it. The branches and leaves on the banyan tree were extremely lush, like a huge cover, covering a radius of several hundred feet. The green shadow reflected in the lake looked so soft. In a corner of the banyan tree, half of a wooden house protruded from the branches and leaves. The wooden house was not big. From the outside, the area inside was not more than 20 square meters. The wooden house and the banyan tree were natural, as if they were born to be one. Some water birds skimmed over the lake, bringing a breeze that made the lake ripple, bringing some vitality to this tranquil space. Nian Bing was stunned, and so was the dragon god. He didn't expect that the place where the true god lived would be so beautiful. Nian Bing sighed softly and said, "This is the domain of the true god. How beautiful!" He couldn't help but feel a little envious of this life god, Cow. He fantasized in his heart that if he and his 3 beloved women could one day live in such a place, how wonderful would that be? Nian Bing was about to step inside, but the dragon god stopped her. However, the dragon god pulled him back. The dragon god gave him a look, then lowered his head to look at the various plants growing on the ground. Nian Bing immediately understood what he meant. He stopped and cast his gaze towards the wooden house in the middle of the lake. The dragon god bowed slightly and said respectfully, "Dragons Kakiokis and little human friend Nian Bing request an audience with Senior." His voice was not high, but Nian Bing could see through the Tian Yen acupoint that the voice, under the control of the dragon god, went straight to the wooden house in the lake. An indifferent voice sounded from all directions. "Kargiogos, I'm not a Kargiogos. We haven't seen each other for a long time. You didn't bring a human." This flat and soft voice sounded. Nian Bing tried her best to track it down, but she still couldn't feel where it came from. The voice was very neutral, and she couldn't even distinguish the gender of the god of life. But every word in the voice was so clear and every word deeply touched his heart. The dragon god Kakiokis hurriedly said, "Senior, this is exactly what Kakiokis is asking you for, and I also want to ask for your help." "I understand what you mean. You go back and leave him here." The indifferent voice sounded again. This time, the aura in the voice seemed to have changed. Nian Bing only felt her spirit shake violently, and the death energy in her body was completely restrained by an invisible pressure. Her body couldn't move at all, and only her spiritual force was still active. The dragon god was overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Thank you for your help, Senior. This junior will take his leave first." "Wait, there is one thing I want to tell you in advance. What I hate most is the aura of death. You have already violated my taboo by bringing a dead person here. If you want to leave here, you will have to pay some price. The vitality of dragons has always been the most abundant among all races, so you should leave half of your vitality." The indifferent voice was still calm, but Nian Bing's heart was set off monstrous waves. She had seen the strength of the dragon god with her own eyes, and the super-transmission magic of the 14th step was so amazing. However, this god of life, who she had just met, actually casually asked for half of the dragon god's vitality. The dragon god's complexion changed slightly, and he looked at the huge banyan tree in the lake, his eyes constantly flickering. Nian Bing could feel through the Tian Yen acupoint that the energy in the dragon god's body was fluctuating rapidly, as if it could erupt at any time. The dragon god's voice sounded, "Well, as long as Senior can save our friend of dragons, what's wrong with giving Senior half of my vitality? Senior dragon god, you can't." Nian Bing did not care about the corpse poison in her body and pulled the dragon god. The dragon god smiled and said, "Nian Bing, you were willing to give up all your vitality for us dragons, and I can repay your kindness with only half of my vitality. Speaking of which, I still profited. Although the vitality of us dragons is not endless, the remaining vitality can at least let me live for another 10,000 years. Don't stop me. Since Senior has agreed to help you, this is already very lucky." A resolute look flashed across Nian Bing's eyes. He turned around and faced the center of the lake. "Senior True God, Senior Dragon God has come here for me. I'd rather not recover my own life force than see him get hurt. Please take back your order. I won't ask you to heal me." Nian Bing's eyes flashed with determination. If half of the dragon god's vitality was exchanged for her rebirth, then she would not be at ease for the rest of her life. The indifferent voice sounded again, "You have no right to talk to me. What the dragon god wants to redeem is his guilt, not the price he has to pay for you. I promised to help him once, and I can do that, but he also has to pay the price for offending me." Nian Bing hurriedly said, "Since you've promised to help Senior Dragon God once, you'll be helping him by letting him go this time. I don't need you to save me. Have you thought about it? If the conditions are changed, you, a little undead, actually came here to pollute my space. There is only one result for you, and that is, your body and soul will be destroyed." Nian Bing coldly snorted and said, "Well, you let Senior Dragon God go. I have already thought about it." The Dragon God anxiously said, "Nian Bing, you can't. Have you forgotten why I brought you here? If you don't think for yourself, don't you think about those who care about you? Nian Bing smiled and said, If I choose to let you lose half of your vitality because of selfishness, even if I am resurrected, I am afraid my lovers will look down on me. Rather than that, I would rather be perfect in their hearts forever. Senior Dragon God, please go. The Dragon God sighed. He understood Nian Bing's idea very well, but since she had already come here, how could he let Nian Bing die like this? He took a deep breath. Just as he was about to release his vitality, a green light suddenly lit up from the banyan tree in the lake. The green light was sparkling and translucent, like a rainbow, from the central treehouse all the way to the lake. A faint figure appeared. The next moment, this figure came to the lake and floated in the air. The plants seemed to be excited by her arrival, and flowers bloomed one after another. In an instant, the surroundings had become a sea of flowers, and a strong aura of life nourished every plant. The surging aura of life suppressed Nian Bing's death aura. He was horrified to find that the aura of life that he had always liked was so disgusting at this time. These auras of life constantly invaded his body, and the death aura gradually shrank back under their pressure. In the aura of life, his body seemed to be burning. The excruciating pain in his body didn't affect Nian Bing's vision. It was also because of the visual impact that the pain in his body was much less intense. The person who floated over from the green streak of light wasn't the white-haired person that he had imagined. It was a woman, and she didn't look very beautiful. She was in her 20s, and her light green long hair hung down from her back to the ground, touching the plants. Under the contrast of the fresh flowers, her light green dress looked very light. She was not considered beautiful, and was just an ordinary woman, only her skin was a little fairer. Compared with stunning beauties like Feng Nu and Lan Chen, she was nothing at all. Even Long Ling was much more beautiful than her. Chapter 166. However, this woman exuded an aura that Nian Bing had never seen before. It didn't seem to belong to a human. In her deep, dark green eyes, a magnetic field that resembled the sea of life radiated outwards. Her appearance, which couldn't be considered beautiful, appeared so gentle in the midst of the enormous life aura. Looking at her, Nian Bing knew that the pain he was feeling now wasn't intentional. It was caused by the life force magnetic field that existed around her. If one couldn't erupt in silence, they had to die in silence. Nian Bing didn't have time to consider that this woman might be the god of life. For the sake of survival, he immediately reacted. The Tian Yen acupoint between his eyebrows lit up, and a layer of faint rainbow light erupted from within. Facing the life aura, he instantly used his mental power to set up a restriction around his body. Because of the enormous mental power and the fact that Tsing Jing had stored Nian Bing's soul, the Tian Yen acupoint wasn't affected by the death aura of the zombie technique. However, mental power was completely different from death aura. After the Tian Yen acupoint mutated, its mental power was a mixture of innate qi, mental power, and 7 types of elemental magic. This gave Nian Bing a very unique mental power. Moreover, these 7 types of energy didn't reject life aura. In fact, they were even close to life aura. Therefore, as soon as he released his mental power, Nian Bing immediately adapted to the energy in the life force magnetic field. The pain instantly disappeared, and he couldn't help but let out a long breath. The young woman let out a soft cry of surprise. She couldn't help but look at Nian Bing. Nian Bing's deathly gaze met her incomparably clear eyes, and he immediately felt his body tremble violently. The death aura surged wildly, and his body felt like it would collapse at any moment. He was so frightened that he quickly closed his eyes and observed the young woman through his Tian Yen. After the Tian Yen acupoint's evolution, it had reached an extremely accurate level in terms of observing energy. However, when Nian Bing looked at the young woman at this time, he was shocked to find that what appeared in his Tian Yen acupoint was actually a crystal. A green humanoid crystal. There was no energy for him to judge anything at all. It was completely formed by an enormous amount of life force. Circles of green light drifted out, nourishing all the living creatures in the surroundings. It was this life force magnetic field that almost took his life earlier. Strange, there are actually zombies that have opened their celestial eye acupoints. This is really strange. The young girl raised her hand and gently waved it in the direction of Nianbing. Nianbing had no chance to struggle at all and was caught by a light green hand. Although he tried his best to release his spiritual power and wanted to struggle, this huge life force was too strong and did not give him a chance to struggle. At this moment, Nianbing thought of Mu Rong and his sister from the Longmu Empire during the competition in the Huarong Empire. Wasn't their life magic very similar to this girl's? It was just that they weren't on the same level. "Senior, please have mercy on me." The dragon god didn't move. Instead, he stood there and respectfully bowed to the girl in front of him. His actions had already proven that this girl was the god of life with a masculine name. Cao said indifferently, "This little zombie already said that he doesn't need your help. I'll let you go this time. You can go." The dragon god anxiously said, "Senior, I'm willing to release half of my life force. Please save this human." Cao's calm eyes stared at the dragon god. The dragon god only felt his whole body tremble slightly, and a strange feeling made his heart tremble slightly. Cao said indifferently, "You can go. This human's body structure is somewhat interesting. I may not kill him. I've returned the favor of the dragons." The dragon god was overjoyed. Although the god of life Cao didn't say it directly, he vaguely understood what he meant. He hurriedly agreed and turned to walk towards the Golden Gate. Watching the dragon god leave, Nianbing, who was restrained, suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. The dragons had helped her enough. If the dragon god was implicated because of her, Nianbing would never be at ease. "Do you know why I haven't killed you yet?" Cao's eyes fell on Nianbing again. Because Nianbing was a zombie, she couldn't look at the god of life at all. She had to close her eyes and look at the god of life in front of her with her Tian Yin acupoint. "I'm afraid it's because of my spiritual force." "Yes, it's because of your strange spiritual force that I've spared your life. Judging from the aura of death on your body, you haven't been a zombie for long. The evil aura in your aura of death is still very faint. Judging from your personality, you haven't been affected by the zombie spell. Among humans, it's very rare to see someone with spiritual power at your level. But the reason why I haven't killed you is not because you're clear-headed. The death aura is the aura I hate the most. When you entered my realm of life, the death aura on your body has polluted this aura. I haven't killed you because there's a strange spiritual force in your Tian Yin acupoint, which I've never seen before. That's why I've spared your life for the time being." Looking at Cao, Nianbing's heart gave birth to a glimmer of hope. The sentence Cao had just said was the longest sentence since she appeared. Obviously, she was very curious about her spiritual force. If she could use this situation to her advantage, with her strange and powerful life force, she might really be able to restore herself to a human. Thinking of this, Nianbing immediately became polite. "Senior Cao, sometimes even I feel that my spiritual force is very strange. Unfortunately, because I released my life force to cast a spell, my life force was exhausted. Without the support of Xiantian Qi, my spiritual force can no longer be released to its strongest level. Although my spiritual force has improved on the way here, I don't fully understand where it improved." Cao looked at Nianbing and frowned slightly. "Remember, from now on, always use your spiritual force to protect your body. If I find a trace of the aura of death leaking out, I will immediately erase you from this world." Before Nianbing could react, the giant's green hand of life had already thrown her out, directly hitting the surrounding white clouds. Nianbing only felt her whole body tighten, and suddenly couldn't move. Although spiritual force could protect the body from the outside world's aura of life, it consumed a lot of spiritual force. Fortunately, Nianbing's spiritual force had made another breakthrough, so she was able to maintain her spiritual force to protect every part of her body. Cao seemed to have forgotten about Nianbing. Looking at the hundreds of blooming flowers around her, her gaze couldn't help but become much gentler. Waving her right hand lightly, she plucked a fresh flower from the branches and leaves beside her. Her red lips kissed the flower gently, pinching a flower stem and slowly putting it into her mouth. Lightly chewing, she ate a flower. The flower stem fell to the ground and burrowed into the soil by itself. After a while, a new flower would grow. Cao's movements were very gentle. She ate a different flower each time, and during the process of eating the flower, there was always a faint smile on her face, as if this was the most enjoyable thing for her in the world. Do gods need to eat too? Nianbing, who was trapped in the white clouds, felt lonely and couldn't help but ask. Cao didn't even look at him. She waved her hand and a green light flashed. Nianbing only felt a pain on her face, and immediately afterward, this pain instantly entered her brain, completely becoming an intense pain that came from the heart. Her body trembled, and she almost couldn't control her spiritual force to protect her body. Fortunately, the energy left as quickly as it came, disappearing in just the blink of an eye. Cao's cold voice sounded in Nianbing's ears. If you disturb me eating again, I'll let you experience the feeling of living a life worse than death. Nianbing bitterly smiled and said, Senior, can you let me say something? I just feel that you eating flowers like this is simply a waste of natural resources. There are so many rare flowers and herbs, you can't eat them like this. Cao was stunned for a moment, and the coldness in her voice clearly disappeared a little. You know how to eat these flowers? Nianbing nodded and said, Flowers can be used to make medicine, and flowers can also be used to make dishes. Different flowers need to be eaten in different ways to fully display the characteristics of the flowers. Just like the few little red flowers on your left, they are called red exquisite plum blossoms. They have the effects of lowering heat, anti-inflammatory, detoxifying, beautifying, and prolonging aging. You need to wash them with warm water and add some rock sugar to them. For women, it can remove some of the color spots on their skin, and it's much better than eating them directly. Also, the light purple flowers on your right are lustrous and uniform, and the purple color is elegant and gradual. They should be rare violet fragrance treasures. They can moisturize the skin, remove wrinkles, and remove spots. The most valuable thing is that they can resolve the cough, throat, and nose of ordinary people. Of course, for you, these won't happen. Cao couldn't help but be interested after hearing Nianbing's words, and asked, Then how should this violet fragrance be eaten? Nianbing smiled and said, Most flowers can't be eaten directly. Eating them directly will have a poor effect, and although the fragrance of the flowers is there, it is accompanied by a bit of bitterness, which is really not beautiful. The real way to eat this purple silk fragrance was to crush the flower stalk and extract a purple juice. Or it could be air-dried and then steeped in hot water. During the steeping process, the color would change. At first, it was transparent, but it would quickly turn purple, and then gradually brown. If some orange juice is added, the liquid will turn pink. Whether it's drinking or looking at it, it's a very wonderful enjoyment. Nianbing had once specially researched under the guidance of Zhao Ji regarding the use of herbs in meals. Zhao Ji had once given him a book, which specifically discussed the ways to eat all kinds of strange flowers and herbs. Unfortunately, strange flowers and herbs were hard to find. He only had the theoretical knowledge, but had never put it into practice. When he first saw the flowers growing around the god of life, Nianbing immediately recognized the origin of these flowers based on his own memory. Therefore, when Cao ate the flowers, he couldn't help but mention the use of these flowers. Cooking was Nianbing's interest. Although he was in a dangerous place, when something that interested him suddenly appeared, he couldn't help but talk about it. After listening to Nianbing's words, Cao's eyes were full of vitality. He revealed a faint smile and said, Interesting, I didn't expect that a little zombie like you would have so much knowledge about flowers. It seems that I made the right choice not to kill you. However, I don't have any orange juice or rock sugar that you just mentioned. When you and the dragon god passed through the enchantment and entered the continent of gods, I knew that you must have come from the Yangon continent. Seeing that Cao's tone was a lot gentler, Nian Bing's mind couldn't help but relax. He nodded and said, "Yes, I came from the Yangon continent. Frankly speaking, I really envy you for having so many strange flowers and herbs. In the Yangon continent, no matter what kind of flower it is, you can't find it so casually." "What a pity, what a pity!" Cao said indifferently. "I collected the seeds of these flowers and herbs from several continents. Most of them came from the Yangon continent. It's just that there are relatively few of them there, but when it comes to my bundle, I have all of them. Since you have the ability to recognize flowers, I would like to hear what else you have to say about these flowers." Nian Bing smiled and said, "Then I have to ask Senior first. With your ability, you shouldn't eat flowers to satisfy your hunger, right?" Cao glanced at Nian Bing and said, "Tasting different kinds of flowers and plants will give me different feelings of life. For me, this is just a kind of enjoyment. Only in my realm of life, which is full of life aura, can I make these flowers of different seasons fully bloom." Nian Bing smiled and said, "Since you just want to enjoy the wonderful taste of the flowers, then you shouldn't taste them directly. After processing, the taste of these flowers can only be more wonderful. In the past, my master once taught me a method of brewing Bai Hua Du. Bai Hua Du can be said to be a kind of wine, but it can also be said to be a kind of drink. It must be brewed with 100 different kinds of flowers. You also know, where can you find 100 kinds of flowers in an ordinary place? Even if you gather all of them, I'm afraid some of the flowers will have already withered. Different kinds of flowers will produce different kinds of Bai Hua Du. Gathering the fragrance of 100 flowers and retaining the changes of the different flavors of each flower, that is the best Bai Hua Du. The more exotic the flower, the more magical the Bai Hua Du produced. Unfortunately, I am now full of death aura, which can easily contaminate your flowers. Otherwise, I can really help you brew some Bai Hua Du. That is the world's most delicious food, the champion of using flowers in food. Whether it is a human or a god, there will be desires in the heart." Nian Bing had already grasped the desires of the god of life in the shortest time possible. Women all like flowers. From her misty appearance when eating flowers, it can be seen that she has a special preference for flowers. At this time, Nian Bing thought of Jia Ji. She felt more and more that the knowledge Jia Ji taught her was very useful. Bai Hua Du, is that to put 100 kinds of flowers together? A hint of curiosity appeared on Cao's face. Her green eyes full of life were filled with the light of hope. Nian Bing said, "Of course it is not that simple. The preparation of Bai Hua Du requires special craftsmanship. Because the nature of the flowers is different, it needs to be gradually prepared according to the types and not put together all at once. Otherwise, if there is a mixture of poison between the flowers, not only will the Bai Hua Du fail, but it will also become poison." "You know how to brew Bai Hua Du?" Cao's voice had a little more joy. Nian Bing nodded and said, "I was a chef on the Yangon continent. 100 Flower Du is the best wine and also the best seasoning. Unfortunately, even my master only knows how to brew it, but has never succeeded in refining it. It's because he couldn't gather enough rare flowers." Cao's voice suddenly became calm. "Do you want to use the method of refining Bai Hua Du in exchange for my help to restore your life force?" Nian Bing said calmly, "Of course, perhaps this refining method is the only way I can benefit you. The exchange of benefits is always the most reasonable. Begging, using feelings, and so on are all better than a direct exchange of benefit. I think that if you are willing to save me, you will not regret it. After all, with your strength, even if I am reborn, you can destroy me at any time, right?" "You are very frank." Cao smiled, a trace of admiration in his eyes. "I like frank people. Well, then I will exchange with you. However, if the Baiwa do you speak of does not satisfy me, then I am afraid that you will not even be able to become a zombie. I have never trusted humans easily. If you want to gain my trust, you have to tell me the names and effects of at least 10 kinds of flowers around here. Nian Bing nodded. She said, "That is not a problem. The only choice I have now is to believe your promise. As one of the 4 true gods of the godly continent, I think you will not go back on your words. Can you put me down? I promise that I will use my spiritual power to block the aura of death and will not pollute this wonderful realm of life of yours." His voice was no longer as respectful as before. Nian Bing knew that this so-called god of life in front of her had probably lived for many years. Her strange personality was not something that could be won over by being respectful. Since that was the case, she might as well be herself. Wouldn't that be more comfortable? As long as she was still useful, she would naturally be able to live. Cao casually waved his hand and sucked Nian Bing down from the white fog. Under the effect of the surging aura of life, he floated above the flowers but did not fall. Obviously, she did not want him to trample on these flowers that were full of aura of life. Nian Bing's gaze moved, but she did not look at Cao. Instead, she was completely focused on the flowers in front of her. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. She pointed at a yellow flower that was composed of countless petals of the same size and had a very short stem. This should be the bright lotus snowflower. Heavens! You actually have this kind of flower here. The bright lotus snowflower only grows on the peak of a mountain, in places covered in white snow. It is a kind of flower with extremely tenacious vitality. Together with the snow lotus, it is known as the snow twin beauties. It has a miraculous effect on reducing heat. Moreover, if an ordinary person takes it for a long time, it can prolong their life and slow down their aging. Cao thought for a while and said, "Not bad. I did get the seed of this flower from a mountain. It is surrounded by a world of ice and snow. It seems that you do have some skills." Nian Bing seemed to not hear Cao's praise. Her gaze fell on a light blue flower on the other side. "It's too magical. Even this one has it. This is also a flower that grows on high mountains, but it grows at a higher altitude than the bright lotus snowflower. It is called the Jade Beauty. Blue sky, white clouds, tall mountains, green grass, mysterious and holy peaks can give birth to this kind of strange flower. It is called the Snow Peak Holy Grass. It has the effect of nourishing yin and kidney, strengthening yuanyang, regulating qi and blood, and moisturizing the skin and black hair. The normal way to eat it is to brew it with boiling water. The soup will be a clear light green color, overflowing with a quiet fragrance of flowers, and the taste is gentle and mellow." Cao's eyes showed a trace of surprise. "Okay, I believe you. These 2 flowers are indeed more difficult to obtain. You can even recognize them. I think that your words about the dew of 100 flowers should not be a lie." Nian Bing said, "Then are you willing to help me restore my vitality now?" Cao said indifferently, "Yes, but it's not easy for you to recover your life force in your current situation. Simply put, your body has already become a zombie. Although you're still conscious of your body, you're already a dead person. I am the god of life, but not the god of death. As long as there is still a breath left, I can easily revive him. However, you are already a dead person. My life force will only harm you. It will be difficult to bring you back to life. I will need some things to assist me. However, these things are not something that I can possess." Nian Bing asked, "Then what do I need to make my body accept life force again?" Cao said, "You need a strange medicine. Through this medicine, the death qi in your body can be completely expelled and your body will become a newly dead state. Then, with the life force, you can stimulate the innate qi and revive your body's functions. Only then can you truly become a living person. Originally, you had no hope of reviving, but because you opened the Lizhong acupoint, when you lost your vitality, the innate qi in your body completely stayed in the Lizhong acupoint, giving you a glimmer of life. Looking at Cao's calm expression, Nian Bing asked, "Where can I find this medicine?" Cao said indifferently, "If you want to be reborn, you need to work hard on your own. When you get out of here, follow the direction I pointed out. After crossing 3 mountains, you will see a black waterfall. Behind the waterfall, there is a fruit tree. You can pick the 3 white fruits on it and give them to me." Nian Bing's heart trembled. Even though he hadn't been in the godly mainland for long with the dragon god, the various strange sights on the godly mainland had left a very deep impression on him. In his current state, the only power he could use apart from his physical body was his spiritual power. Crossing the 3 mountains was easy to say, but it wouldn't be so easy to actually do it. "What, are you afraid?" Cao gave Nian Bing a sidelong glance. "Weren't you very confident when you talked about these flowers just now? Since you dared to come here, you must have a certain amount of psychological preparation. To tell you the truth, those 3 fruits are also very important to me. It's just that I promised those 3 people that I would not leave here easily. This time, consider it as me using you. Your body only needs 1 fruit. As for the other 2, consider it the price you have to pay." Nian Bing smiled slightly and said, "Afraid? I'm already a zombie, what's there to be afraid of? What's more, although this is the continent of gods, it may not necessarily be able to bury me here. Please point out the distance." There were 3 people who could threaten the god of life. There was no need to think, it must be the other 3 true gods. Cao glanced at Nian Bing, and a hint of approval appeared on his calm face. "For so many years, apart from those 3 people, you are the only one who dared to be so disrespectful to me. Seeing your understanding of flowers, I will spare your life. But if you die on the road, you can't blame me. Follow the direction of the blind road, you can go." With that, he waved his hand. A faint golden light appeared on his palm. As the light flickered, a golden tunnel opened up to the white fog, giving Nian Bing a new path. Nian Bing only felt that his body was sent to the edge of the tunnel, as if he was riding the clouds. It just so happened that he would not touch anything in the realm of life. It seemed. This god of life was really clean. Without hesitation, Nian Bing's feet touched the ground, and in a few flashes, he was already out of the boundary of the realm of life. All along, he had mainly used magic. Although he had a strong body, he did not practice any physical skills, and knew very little about how to use his body. The zombie technique and the transformation of the dragon's soul gave him a physique that far surpassed that of ordinary people. Even in a situation where he was not familiar with his body, his speed was very fast. His whole body was filled with the aura of death, so he could not clearly feel how strong he was. But Nian Bing was very clear that for the next part of his journey, he would have to rely on the combination of his body and spiritual energy to pass through. In this god's continent there was no supply, and Nian Bing was not familiar with everything here. But, in order to survive, his fighting spirit had been raised to the peak. When Cao told him that he had to go over the mountain to get the medicine, he already understood that what he would have to face was not only the various magical beasts of the gods' continent, but also the gods of the gods' continent. As an outsider, he was afraid that the people here would not accept him at all, not to mention that he was now an undead. Without the aura of life, Nian Bing felt much more comfortable even though the environment around him was much harsher than when he was in the realm of life. Even though the unstable magical elements in the air were constantly fluctuating, he could easily resist the aura of death that he released again. It was much more comfortable than when he was in the realm of life. Taking a deep breath, Nian Bing looked back. The golden tunnel had already closed, and Cao's voice sounded as if it would never change. "Follow the direction of the tunnel, and remember my description. After you get the 3 fruits, come back immediately, don't delay. No matter what kind of danger you encounter, you can only rely on yourself. Let me remind you, the closer you are to the target, the stronger the creatures you will face. Whether it is gods or demons, you have to rely on your own strength to deal with them." Cao's voice disappeared, but Nian Bing did not rush to start. He looked up at the dark clouds in the sky, took a deep breath, and stood in the same place. He spread out his spiritual power to 20 feet around him, feeling all the changes in the atmosphere. At the same time, he did not have to resist the corrosion of the aura of life, and he could let his spiritual power slowly recover in this silent space. Nian Bing's mental strength only recovered to its peak after standing on the spot for an hour. He lowered his head and glanced at his gray skin. He could not help but smile bitterly. He had never thought that there would be a day when he would live as an undead zombie. Furthermore, he had to rely on this method to find his path of rebirth. Taking another deep breath, he threw away all the distracting thoughts in his mind, and used his spiritual power to determine the direction he was going to go. Nian Bing jumped up without hesitation, and his body turned into a gray arrow in the air, flying towards the fixed direction. The path wasn't smooth. To be precise, there weren't any roads on the godly mainland. However, this wasn't enough to stop Nian Bing from advancing. Every time he used all his strength, he would be able to leap more than 100 feet forward. He was like a meteor as he continued to advance. All he needed to do was to find a point on the rugged ground where he could borrow strength. From afar, he could already see the first mountain. It was a black mountain, and the whole mountain was filled with an oppressive atmosphere. There were no plants growing on the mountain, but there were many holes on the bare mountain. They looked like they were caused by the wind, but also looked like they were man-made. Just as Nian Bing slowed down and raised his vigilance, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded. More than 10 green figures drilled out from the holes on the mountain, and rushed in his direction like lightning. Nian Bing's eyes lit up. Through his Tian Yen acupoint, he could clearly see these little green things. They were the green lucids. Facing this kind of magical beast, he no longer felt any fear. His eyes lit up, and through his Tian Yen acupoint, he sensed the direction they were coming from. His body suddenly stopped moving forward, and quickly flashed in the same place, dodging the first attack of the green lucid. At the same time, Nian Bing did not just passively take a beating, he also launched his own attack. With the previous experience, this time his movements were much faster. His Tian Yen acupoint flashed with a faint 7-colored light, and his huge spiritual power formed an invisible domain around his body. His eyes flashed, and in just a moment, 4 green lucid turned into a rain of blood under his tyrannical spiritual power. Although the physical defense of the green lucid was strong, their spiritual power was negligible. Attacking them from the inside out was the best way to deal with them. Nian Bing's eyes revealed a bloodthirsty light, and under the stimulation of the fresh blood, a sense of annoyance rose in his heart. He knew that this was the nature of a zombie, and he did not reject this kind of nature. His figure flashed, and his hands used the skills that he learned when he was practicing his culinary skills. He kept cleverly slapping the remaining green lucid away, and then used his tyrannical spiritual power to completely dispose of them. In just a few moments, Nian Bing already had 11 red cores in his hand. He did not hesitate, and immediately put these blood essences into his mouth. The taste of fresh blood stimulated his senses, and as a zombie, this was definitely the greatest enjoyment. After swallowing more than 10 green lucid cores, his gray body gradually emitted a faint blood aura. The feeling of being full of power made him look up to the sky and roar. With a casual claw, he left a clear mark on the solid black mountain rock. Chapter 167. As the dragon god said, everything on this continent of the gods was different from the continent of Yangon. Not only were the gods here far more powerful than ordinary humans, but even the rocks had become dozens of times harder than ordinary rocks because of the constant baptism of the harsh environment. If he was in the continent of Yangon, he was afraid that even a small hill could be flattened by his claw. Nian Bing was now eager for the green lucid to come out of the inkstone again. After all, the pleasure brought by swallowing the crystal core of the G.O. beast was the only thing that made him feel comfortable since he came to the continent of the gods. What's more, it could also enhance his strength. With every increase in strength, his future journey would be smoother. What was stored in the core of the green lucid was the source of the green lucid energy, not the life force. With the zombie's body absorbing it, there was almost no need to consider any side effects. However, the fact was not as he imagined. Until Nian Bing stepped on the top of the mountain, there was no more green lucid. Standing on the high black mountain, Nian Bing had already seen the second mountain, which was twice as high as the one he was on. The difference was that the color of the mountain was completely red. It was a red that exuded a dark aura, a dark red. Simply stepping on the mountain, Nian Bing's heart did not relax at all. Not only was he always vigilant with his spiritual force, but he was also constantly observing the surrounding situation. In a foreign land, in order to fulfill his promise to his beloved women, he must be careful at all times. He knew that his life was no longer entirely his own. He still wanted to go back and join his beloved women, and he also wanted to rescue his parents, but all of this was on the premise that he could be reborn safely. Just as Nian Bing was about to continue forward, the spiritual power that he had spread around his body suddenly trembled violently. At the same time, he heard the dull sound of thunder. Not long after the thunder sounded, a dazzling bolt of lightning flashed across the sky. Following that, the dense sound of thunder came one after another. It was as if the entire godly mainland was trembling in this thunder. What surprised Ling Nian Bing even more was that the magical elements in the air, which were not calm, were rapidly fluctuating. It was not a regular fluctuation, but a kind of violent fluctuation. Every time it fluctuated, the space seemed to be distorted. Nian Bing's spiritual force, which was originally spread out to 20 feet outside his body, was almost compressed to 10 feet around his body in a few blinks of an eye. In an instant, Nian Bing suddenly thought of one thing. He also wanted to understand why he could so easily climb to the top of the first mountain without encountering too many obstacles. Not long ago, when he and the dragon god had just arrived on the continent of the gods, the dragon god had once told him that on this continent of the gods there could be a magic storm. Under the baptism of a magic storm, even the gods would find it difficult to bear. In the current situation, it was estimated that his luck was too good. As soon as he came out, he encountered a magic storm. As soon as he figured out what was about to happen, Nian Bing did not hesitate and immediately responded by crouching down. He quickly drilled into the two tall mountains next to him. He did not want to stand on the peak and become a lightning rod. The power of the explosion of lightning was very great for the zombies to break the tombstones. He almost rushed directly into the two rocks, and just at the moment he left, Nian Bing felt a numbness behind him, and the surroundings seemed to be bright. A burst of impact suddenly appeared, shaking him and temporarily making him lose his hearing. The place where he had just been standing had become scorched black. Of course, the mountain itself was black, and the traces of the lightning bombardment were not obvious, but there was a pit with a diameter of nearly 10 feet there. Ling Nian Bing was very glad. The magical elements in the air were fluctuating more and more strongly. In order to save his strength, Nian Bing carefully withdrew his spiritual force to the surface of his skin. His whole body curled up so that the surface area of his body in contact with the outside air was minimized. He did not know whether he could withstand the magic storm that was about to come, but now he could only try. At least, the situation of waiting for death would never appear on him. While holding his head with both hands to resist the raging magical elements in the air, Nian Bing carefully observed his surroundings. He could not help but feel a little lucky that he had chosen to be in the middle of two solid black rocks. These two rocks were very large in size, like two small hills. The rocks were at least 3 feet high. Looking from the bottom, he could only see the constantly changing dark clouds because of the lightning. In here, the magical elements in the air were obviously not as strong as outside. Most of the magical energy fluctuations were blocked by the rock. Secretly relieved, Nian Bing knew that what he had to do was to wait. He just hoped that this magic storm would not last for too long. He had just eaten more than 10 green crystal cores, so he was not worried about the consumption of his death energy. Those cores were a great supplement for him. Now he only needed to wait. The consumption of spiritual force was not large, and it was enough to give him time to replenish. At this time, Nian Bing's spiritual force suddenly moved. He saw that under the rock not far in front of him, there was a small hole about 3 feet in diameter. A head popped out from the hole, and the eyes just happened to meet with him. "Ah, who are you?" The voice was a little stiff and sounded a little strange, but after all, it was the human language that Nian Bing could understand. It was a short male human. It was difficult to tell his age from his face, because at least 2/3 of his face was covered by a curly brown beard. His eyes were also brown, and although he was a little surprised to see Nian Bing, it was not strong. From his eyes, Nian Bing saw a strong hostility. With a smile on his face, Nian Bing said, "Hello, are you a god here?" The short man snorted and said, "Damn it, god your ass, I am a dwarf, not a god. Why did you come to the territory of us dwarves? Do you want to challenge the dignity of us dwarves? The smell on your body is disgusting, humph, and you are the lowest class of human. If it wasn't for the magic storm coming, just because you just destroyed our food, I would have sent you to hell. Quickly leave here, and if you pollute our holy mountain again, I will teach you a lesson." Looking at the dwarf's fierce appearance, Nian Bing frowned and said, "Dwarf, I have heard of this race. It seems to be a race in the past of the forgotten continent. Looking at your appearance, you are indeed very short. I don't mean any harm. There is a magic storm outside now. Even if I want to go out, I can't. I still don't have the confidence to use my body to contend with the magic storm." The dwarf shouted angrily and said, "No matter what reason you have, you can't stay here with us." "Wait, just now you actually mentioned the forgotten continent. Heavens! Could it be that you are not one of the gods?" Nian Bing stared blankly for a moment and said, "Why do you say that? Don't I look like one?" "Of course not, you are an undead, but you don't seem to be the undead of those gods, because the 4 universes of the forgotten continent are taboo universes among the gods. They will never say it out easily. Where did you come from?" The dwarf looked at Han Bing's eyes, no longer full of hatred as before, but with a bit of curiosity. Hui Bing smiled slightly. Said, "I came from a distant place, as you said. I am not a god, of course. You don't ask me where I came from. Don't ask who brought me here. I can only tell you that I am a human, a pure human. Although I am now an undead body, I am still a human after all." The dwarf looked at Nian Bing. Said, "How can you prove that you are not a god?" A loud boom rang out, causing the entire mountain to tremble violently. The magical elemental fluctuations in the air became even more violent. Nian Bing felt his entire body tense up. He hurriedly strengthened his mental strength to protect himself. Only then was he able to resist the destructive magical elemental fluctuations in the surroundings. The dwarf's words were only half spoken when he was shocked by the loud thunder, and a layer of black light was emitted from his body. That was not a black color that belonged to darkness, but an ability similar to Do Qi, forcibly protecting his body from being attacked by the magic element storm. Nian Bing said, "How can I prove it? Could it be that if I prove that I am not a god, you will be willing to accept me?" The dwarf said, "Of course, we dwarves only have hatred for those gods. We have no hatred for ordinary humans. Moreover, our tradition has always been to be warm and hospitable." Nian Bing smiled slightly and said, "Well, I have just arrived here, and I also hope to make new friends. These things can be considered as a gift for you." As she spoke, she waved her left hand, and with the guidance of her spiritual power, she took out a few large flatbread from her spatial ring. Because she was a chef, Nian Bing's spatial ring always stored a large amount of food and ingredients for cooking. After the spatial ring evolved, one of the biggest advantages was its freshness preservation function. Even if there was a lot of food, it would not rot in the spatial ring. Before becoming a zombie, he and Bing Yun had been living in a cave. During that period of time, Nian Bing did not know how long it was. Before that incident, he had just gone to Ice Moon City to buy a lot of things. Now that he had become a zombie, he could not eat, but he always carried the things with him. When he suddenly saw the pancake, the dwarf was stunned for a moment. Then, he let out a low exclamation. His short body rushed out of the cave and snatched the pancake from Nian Bing's hand. He didn't eat it but put it in front of his nose and sniffed it hard. Feeling the fragrance of the pancake, his dark face exuded an intoxicated expression. The big beard on his face trembled constantly, showing his excitement at this time. Nian Bing smiled slightly and said, "Is this enough to prove my identity?" "It's enough, of course it's enough. You must be from the Yangon continent, right? Although I don't know how you broke the seal and came to the continent of gods, I can be sure that you must be from the Yangon continent. Since our homeland was sent to another world by those monsters, this legendary flatbread only appeared in the Yangon continent. This is a legendary food. I didn't expect that I would be lucky enough to see it. Human brother, it's great to know you. I'm a warrior of the dwarf tribe. My name is Wu Luan. You can call me by my name in the future." Nian Bing smiled and said, "Hello, my name is Nian Bing. Wu Luan, can I hide here from the magic storm now?" Wu Luan woke up at this time and hurriedly said, "No, of course not. My friend, you gave me such a precious thing. How can I let you hide here from the magic storm? From today's thunder, I'm afraid that the effect of this magic storm will last for a long time. And it's very strong. Come to my house. There, you won't be hurt by any magic storm." With that, he flashed to the outside of the cave. The hard and heavy rock in his hand was like a piece of wormwood. He pointed to the cave below and signaled Nian Bing to go in. Nian Bing hesitated for a moment. After all, this was the first time he had come into contact with a dwarf. It was inevitable that he would feel a little uneasy. However, when he saw the sincerity in the dwarf's eyes again, he no longer hesitated. He immediately dove in. Seeing that Nian Bing had entered the cave, Wu Luan hurriedly followed him down. At the same time, he covered the rock above. Just as Wu Luan had said, once they entered the crypt, the magic storm outside could no longer affect them. It was pitch black all around them, but they did not feel suffocated at all. After they turned a corner, they saw gems emitting a faint yellow light on the walls of the crypt, illuminating the area. But what made Ling Nian Bing a little uncomfortable was that the cave was really too short. He could only move forward by squatting down. Wu Luan, who was only as tall as his waist, was like a fish in water. He kept turning the pancake in his hand. Looking at his appearance, he seemed to be very excited. Nian Bing couldn't help but ask, "Brother Wu Luan, since you like this pancake so much, why don't you try it? Although I've kept them in my space ring for some time now, I can guarantee that they haven't rotted in the slightest. The taste is still very good." Although these pancakes were not made by Nian Bing himself, with his cooking skills, the pancakes he chose were the best in Ice Moon City. The big beard on Wu Luan's face moved. Through the dim yellow gems on the walls of the cave, Nian Bing seemed to see him smiling. Wu Luan said, "It is because this pancake is too good that I am reluctant to eat it. I want to let my mother eat it first. She must also miss this kind of delicacy that is similar to our legendary hometown." If Nian Bing still had a trace of doubt about Wu Luan, then at this moment, the doubt completely disappeared. The kind of people that Nian Bing admired and liked the most were filial people. He didn't live with his parents since he was young. Not being able to serve his parents was his biggest regret. When he heard Wu Luan's words, his good impression of this dwarf suddenly increased. At this time, they were close, and he didn't have to be distracted to resist the magic storm. Nian Bing could also observe the dwarf in front of him. The spiritual power of the Tian Yen acupoint was opened. Although the light in the cave was dim, it did not affect his vision. The dwarf in front of him seemed to be only about 1.2 meters tall, and his head seemed to be very big. Perhaps because he had too much beard, although his figure was short, it gave people a very strong feeling. His bare arms were knotted with python veins and were often thick. The clothes he wore seemed to be made of animal skin. Although Nian Bing didn't recognize what kind of animal skin it was, the animal skin clothes on Halogen's body were very exquisite. There was even no trace of seam. The whole clothes seemed to be made of nature. Nian Bing didn't expect that there would be such exquisite clothes in a place like the continent of gods. "Brother Nian Bing, let's go. I will take you to see my mother and our people. We dwarves have lived in this holy mountain for tens of thousands of years. If they know that you have brought the legendary flatbread, they will regard you as our benefactor. I really didn't expect that I, Halogen, could see the same thing as my hometown in my lifetime." As he spoke, he took large strides and walked into the depths of the cave. This made Nian Bing suffer. Although his body had been modified very well, it was not easy for him to walk while squatting like this. Fortunately, his zombie body made it so that he did not feel any soreness in his muscles. This was why he could barely keep up with Si Luan's footsteps and continue to walk into the depths of the cave. Ling Nianbing was very surprised that he didn't see any ventilation in the crypt, but no matter how he walked in the crypt, he never felt stuffy. The air here seemed to have been purified, and it was much more comfortable to breathe than the air of the outside world, where the fluctuations of magic elements were extremely unstable. The construction of the tunnel in the crypt was very scientific. The walls of the cave were smooth, without any flaws, and the stairs were in picturesque disorder. It felt as if he was going to enter an underground palace, but this underground palace was really a little short. According to Nian Bing's own feeling, he had probably walked into the center of the mountain. Halogen stopped his footstep. The scene in front of him had changed. He was no longer walking on a single path, but a complex tunnel that constantly led in different directions. Because the tunnel looked very dense, there seemed to be a lot of forks. Nian Bing thought that if he went in alone, it would not be easy to come out. Halogen turned his head to Nian Bing and said, "Looking at your appearance, you are really uncomfortable. Do you want to rest for a while? It took a lot of our people's time to build this crypt to such a large scale. I dare say that except for those 4 old guys, no other place on the continent of gods is more comfortable than our crypt." Nian Bing smiled and said, "The 4 guys you are talking about, I am afraid they are the so-called 4 true gods." Halogen snorted and said, "Who else is there besides them? Those 4 guys relied on their powerful strength to run amok. If it wasn't for them, how could we have lost our home?" Nian Bing said, "Listening to what you said, you seem to miss the lost empire very much. As the descendant of the person involved, you must be very clear about what happened at that time. Although I also know a little, I am definitely not as clear as you." Halogen sat down in the tunnel at the side and took out a cloth-like thing from his bosom. He wrapped those few big flatbread and said resentfully, "Of course I know what happened. Our dwarf race has a very detailed record. The War of the Gods was started by those main god. They were afraid that our lost empire was too powerful and would no longer be under their control. At that time, they were indeed no longer our mat. If it wasn't for those few old guys using their powerful strength to move the entire lost continent to another space, I am afraid that the so-called gods of the continent of gods would have disappeared." Speaking to this point, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a strong hatred. Nian Bing was very surprised and asked, "Then you are saying that your ancestors weren't on the continent of gods before the War of the Gods started, right? Then how did your ancestors come here and not disappear with the Forgotten Empire?" Wu Luan sighed heavily and said, "Back then, that great war didn't just happen in our Forgotten Empire's territory. In order to completely destroy the existences that enslaved us in the godly mainland, the Forgotten Empire sent out the strongest new human army to secretly enter the godly mainland. Among them there were 12 heroes. What they wanted to do was to destroy the foundation of the godly mainland, so that the gods who entered the lost continent would lose their foundation. Nian Bing took the lead and said, "This is indeed a good idea. I think that at that time the lost continent still didn't know about the existence of the true God." Halogen said helplessly, "That's right. At that time no one knew about the existence of the true gods. Therefore, although there were only a few hundred of them, they were the most elite heroes of the Forgotten Empire. In order to not be enslaved again, their hearts were filled with courage. Facing their enemies, they launched a merciless slaughter. Then what happened afterwards? If they really attacked the continent of God's weak point, I'm afraid that those 4 true gods wouldn't just sit by and watch." Halogen said, "AI, it was because of that operation that the Forgotten Empire really lost their chance. Before that, who would have thought that there would be such powerful existences on the continent of gods? No one knew where those 4 true gods came from. There weren't many main gods and demigods left on the continent of gods, and under the attack of the elites, the remaining forces were quickly forced to the brink of death. At that time those true gods appeared. They ordered the Forgotten Empire's 12 heroes to immediately leave the continent of gods and never return. After spending so much effort to reach that point, although the 12 heroes felt that the enemy in front of them was powerful, how could they retreat? They chose to fight. However, it was at that time that they understood what true power was, what the power of the gods was. Speaking to here, a trace of fear appeared on Halogen's face. Although he knew that this was from historical records, these memories had left a very deep impression on him. Death, death like a moth to a flame. Even if the 12 heroes joined hands, they were unable to cause even a small amount of damage to those true gods. In just a dozen breaths of time, more than half of the remaining 200 Forgotten Empire's soldiers had died. As for those true gods, it was as if they hadn't moved at all. They were still looking at them with calm eyes. Clearly feeling the fear in Halogen's heart, Nian Bing couldn't help but ask, "How do the 12 heroes of the Forgotten Empire compare to the main gods of the continent of gods?" Halogen said, "A main god can easily win against any of the 12 heroes in a 1-on-1 battle. In a 1-on-2 battle, they can barely win. In a 1-on-3 battle, they can at most fight to a draw, but in a 1-on-4 battle, the so-called main god will definitely die. Moreover, our 12 heroes came to the continent of gods with the determination to die. They won't back down, and they will never back down." Nian Bing took a deep breath. The difference in strength was so great. From what Halogen said, it seemed that a true god could easily destroy a few main gods. This was no longer a simple gap. If they weren't in the same realm, there was no way they could resist. Then what happened? Did the Forgotten Empire's warriors all die? Halogen shook his head and said, "There are 4 true gods on the continent of gods. At that time, only 3 of them acted. Just as those 3 true gods were about to completely annihilate the Forgotten Empire's warriors, another true god stopped us. The other true god who hadn't acted until now spoke. He stopped the other true gods from acting, and ordered us to leave again. He also told us that this was our last chance. The strange thing was, the other 3 true gods seemed to be very afraid of him, and didn't object to his interference. At this time, only 3 of the 12 heroes remained. They didn't continue to sacrifice themselves. They all knew that when such a strong expert suddenly appeared on the continent of gods, the best choice was to quickly send the news back. Thus, the heroes strategically retreated. And one of the remaining 3 heroes is the strongest warrior in our lovers group, Koemo. He is also my ancestor." At this point, the short Kowloon straightened his chest, his eyes filled with pride. Nian Bing thought for a while and said, "Then the reason why you dwarves stayed here was to monitor the situation here." Halogen and Nian Bing gave a thumbs up and said, "Brother, you are very smart. Our dwarf clan's hero Kamo decided to stay here with the remaining dwarves, not to fight, but to monitor. The enemy was too strong, and only by grasping the enemy's movements could we have a chance of victory. Thus, we stayed on the continent of gods. You know what happened next. When the war on the lost continent was coming to an end, I don't know what method the main gods and gods used, but they actually persuaded those 3 true gods to act against our homeland. At that time, the sky cracked, the earth collapsed, and everything changed. It became so illusory. We were on the enemy's land, and we could only watch as our country disappeared, completely disappeared. Can you imagine what we felt at that time? His face became emotional. His brown eyes were already a bit red. Nian Bing sighed and said, "Then, did you manage to survive on this continent? Could it be that those main gods and gods didn't discover your existence?" Halogen shook his head and said, "How could it be that simple? Those bastards wouldn't let us go. How could they let the dwarves, who were the backbone of the Forgotten Empire, stay?" After the sky and earth changed, everything returned to normal. The environment of the continent of gods became even more terrible. At that time, the remnants of the continent of gods seemed to think that we might have stayed, and began to search for our whereabouts. At first, we relied on the dwarves' unique perception of the terrain to avoid wave after wave of search. However, not long after that, a magic storm appeared. Although there were magic storms on the continent of God, the magic storm that appeared was countless times more powerful than before. Of the 74 of us, a total of 20 disappeared in that magic storm, completely vanishing from the face of the earth. After the magic storm ended, the dwarves who didn't die also suffered heavy injuries. To make matters worse, the remnants of the continent of gods found traces of our dwarves, and killed their way over. Nian Bing's heart trembled, and she said, "Then your ancestors encountered a desperate situation." Just as Halogen had said, in that situation, it was almost impossible for them to survive. Halogen shook his head and said, "Originally, that was the case. However, our fate was changed because of one person. This person is the only person on the continent of gods that we dwarves are grateful to. He was the true god who stopped the other 3 true gods from killing our Forgotten Empire's soldiers. In our dwarves' hearts, only he is worthy of the title of god." Nian Bing stared blankly for a moment before her heart skipped a beat, and she said, "The god you're talking about wouldn't be the god of life, Cow, right?" Halogen stared blankly at Nian Bing and said, "How did you know? You were able to guess this?" Nian Bing smiled slightly and said, "You said that it was the true god who saved you, and the mountain you live in is so close to the realm of life where Cow lives, so the possibility of her saving you is naturally the highest. If it really was her, then when the Forgotten Empire was moved to another space, she didn't participate?" Halogen's eyes shone with respect and said, "Of course, how could the god of life do such a despicable thing? Brother Nian Bing, have you ever thought of a problem? Since the other 3 true gods had the ability to move the lost continent away, they naturally also have the ability to destroy the lost continent. Destroying it is probably more difficult than sending it away." Nian Bing's heart trembled, and she said, "You mean to say that it was because of Cow? The other reason was that when the lost continent was sent to another space, it wasn't destroyed?" Halogen nodded and said, "It really is so. Although the records of our dwarves' history are not very detailed, but from various signs, it is precisely because of this reason that our lost continent had an extremely small chance. Otherwise, the other 3 true gods wouldn't have to waste so much effort to send our country to another place. Wouldn't it be easy to simply destroy it?" Nian Bing nodded in agreement and said, "What you said makes a lot of sense. Now I kind of understand." Chapter 168. Although he himself did not feel that Cow was kind, but listening to Wu Luan, it seemed that it was because of Cow's existence that the Yangon continent had always maintained its original state, and the lost continent had not been truly destroyed. He did not understand why, but if everything was like this, then he really misjudged Cow. The title of God of Life was worthy of its name. Wu Luan said, "Brother, let's go. When mentioning the past, I can't help being long-winded. Oh, by the way, why did you come to the godly continent? How did you pass through the barrier and enter the godly continent?" Wu Luan stood up, and Yen Bing resumed her squatting posture. Under his lead, they walked into an underground cave. While walking, she answered Wu Luan's question. "I am indeed from the Yangon continent, and I had no choice but to come to the godly continent. As you can see, I'm now a zombie, but I'm still human. Furthermore, I'm a human mage. The reason why I became like this is because I used a powerful spell above my level, which caused my life force to be excessively depleted. With the help of my friends, I was barely able to maintain my consciousness using the zombie spell. But now I'm like a walking corpse. I can't be called a human anymore. I don't want to lie to you, so I can't tell you the process of coming to the godly continent. I came here to cure my illness. The one who can help me recover my life force and be reborn as a human is the God of Life cow that you just mentioned." Hearing Yen Bing's words, Wu Luan suddenly stopped and said excitedly, "Then according to what you said, you should have already seen God Cow? What is he like?" Yen Bing smiled and said, "I can't say what he is like, but his ability is the strongest I have ever seen. She said to me, 'If you want to recover your life force, you must find a few fruits,' so I passed by your territory. Oh, by the way, you haven't told me how Cow saved you at that time." Wu Luan said, "The situation was very chaotic at that time. When our people were about to fight with their lives, God Cow appeared, and ordered no one to attack us. At the same time, he also ordered my ancestors not to take a step away from this mountain. The matter was resolved just like that. It was very simple." Yen Bing took a deep breath and said, "To be able to make all the chief gods listen to him with just a single sentence, that's indeed simple. He deeply understood that strength was the true right to speak. Otherwise, why would those overgods listen to Cow?" Wu Luan said, "Brother Yen Bing, where are you going to get my fruit? Since it was Guru Cow who asked you to find a place, maybe I can help you." Yen Bing was delighted and said, "That's great. I'm not familiar with the continent of gods. With your help, I think everything will be much simpler. Cow told me to follow her directions and cross 3 mountains. Then, I'll find a waterfall behind the last mountain. Behind the waterfall is what I'm looking for." Wu Luan's eyes were filled with shock. "It can't be. The waterfall behind the 3 mountains, isn't that the Death God waterfall?" Yen Bing was stunned. "Death waterfall? Do you mean to say that there is a guy who calls himself the Grim Reaper living in the waterfall?" When he thought of this possibility, he was shocked. Yen Bing couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. Cow really thought highly of him. He wanted him to face an expert of the chief god level. Not to mention now, even if he was at his peak, he definitely wouldn't succeed. Wu Luan shook his head and said, "No, no one lives there. The reason why it's called the Death God Waterfall is that even gods will die there." Yen Bing looked at him. He said in surprise, "It can't be. That's actually the explanation. What's so special about that place?" Wu Luan said, "I have been to that place once. It is indeed very special. The color of the waterfall is black, not to mention entering behind the cloth. As long as one comes within 1,000 feet of the small lake below the waterfall, one's body will be eroded by a strong aura of death. It's said that there was once an extremely powerful god who touched a drop of water in the waterfall. His body was immediately enveloped by the aura of death in the waterfall. It didn't take long for him to become the same black liquid as the lake water. Don't you think it's amazing? Aura of death?" Yen Bing frowned slightly. Of course, he wasn't frightened by Wu Luan's description. Instead, he had some other thoughts in his mind. If what Wu Luan said was true, then he could really challenge the Death God waterfall. He was a zombie, after all. The aura of death was extremely harmful to others, but to him, it might be a tonic. At this moment, they had already reached the end of the tunnel. The path ahead suddenly opened up. Nian Bing finally didn't have to squat to walk. Although the stone room in the mountain was still not enough for him to straighten his back, he could still stand with difficulty as long as he lowered his head. "Mom, I'm back!" Wu Luan couldn't wait to shout as soon as he entered the stone room. Nian Bing followed Wu Luan into the stone room. The layout of the stone room was very simple. There were 2 small stone beds, a stone table, and some simple tools on the ground. On one of the stone beds sat an old woman. She looked even shorter than Wu Yu. When she saw Wu Luan enter the room, her eyes revealed a trace of gentleness. She didn't have a beard, but her face was full of wrinkles. The vicissitudes of time had left deep traces on her body. Her hair had already turned silver white. However, she had a pair of clear eyes. When she saw her son, her eyes couldn't help but reveal a trace of a gentle smile. However, when her gaze fell on Nian Bing, it froze. "Wu Luan, why did you bring back a godly person?" She appeared to be a little surprised, but she didn't show any signs of fear. She nimbly jumped off the bed and reached under the bed. Immediately, she pulled out a short axe. The short axe looked very special. She didn't know what metal it was made of. The body of the axe was black, and the handle was engraved with fine and complicated patterns. Nian Bing could clearly feel the strong energy waves on the short axe. There was no cold light at the edge of the blade, and it was still as dark as ever. However, Nian Bing felt a strong pressure from the axe. It was really a good weapon. Even if it wasn't a divine weapon, it wouldn't be too far off. Wu Luan was shocked by his mother's expression. He hurriedly rushed forward and grabbed his mother's hand. "Mom, don't misunderstand. Brother Nian Bing is not a godly person. He just came from the Yangon continent. He came to the continent of gods to treat his illness." As he spoke, he explained how he met Nian Bing. After listening to his explanation, Nian Bing found out that it wasn't a coincidence that she met Wu Luan. When she killed the green lizard, she attracted the attention of Wu Luan, who was in charge of patrolling the sacred mountain. Coincidentally, there was a magic storm, and Wu Luan came out of the cave to meet her. After listening to Wu Luan's words, his mother finally calmed down. However, when she saw the flatbread that Wu Luan took out from his arms, she suddenly became excited again. However, this time she was excited. "Flatbread, it's really flatbread, it's really flatbread. I didn't expect that I would be able to see this legendary flatbread in my lifetime." Ru's excitement was even stronger than Wu Luan's. His short body was constantly trembling, and there were only a few flatbread in his eyes. Nian Bing secretly sighed in her heart. Flatbread. In the Yangon continent, flatbread was nothing at all, but in the continent of gods, it became such a precious thing. The continent of gods was indeed a hellish place. "Hello, Auntie. Consider this flatbread as a gift from me to you. I'm very happy to be able to meet you." Wu Luan's mother raised her head and said, "Call me Auntie Lotta. Thank you for letting us feel the feeling of home. The reason why we dwarves here can continue to live is because we firmly believe that one day, our country will return. Our survival from generation to generation is based on the support of this belief. Otherwise, I'm afraid that our people would have disappeared long ago. I have a premonition. These flatbread indicate that our light is about to come, and our motherland may be returning." Looking at Lotta's appearance, Nian Bing's heart was a little confused. At that time, she had used her life to protect the Miorda's sealing bottle. However, now that she saw Lotta, she didn't know if what she did was right. The return of the Lost Empire was naturally a bad thing for the continent of gods. For the Yangon continent, it was hard to say whether it was good or bad. But for the dwarves like Lotta, as well as the people who were originally from the Lost Man continent, it was absolutely a good thing. Wu Luan said, "Mom, quickly taste what this flatbread tastes like. Eating green lizard every day, I can't stand it anymore." Lotta's face sank and said, "Bastard, how did I educate you, have you forgotten? I told you, when you have good things, you have to think about others first. If our people only think about themselves, I'm afraid that we would have been destroyed in this mountain long ago. Only by helping each other will we be able to hold on until the day our Mu clan returns. Wu Luan's face changed and hurriedly said, Yes, Mom, I know I was wrong. Looking at the mother and son, Nian Bing was moved and hurriedly said, Auntie, you don't have to be like this. I still have some food from the Yangon continent in my space ring. Since you need it, I'll give it to you. Wu Luan's eyes showed a hint of joy, but it quickly disappeared. How can you give it all to us? You have to eat yourself. You know, in the continent of gods, the most precious thing is food. Wow, I'm sorry, I forgot that you don't need food anymore. Speaking of this, he couldn't help showing a trace of shame on his face. Nian Bing smiled bitterly and said, In fact, even I forget sometimes. It's not your fault. It's a pity that I can't use magic now, and this is a closed space. Otherwise, I can make some delicious food from the Yangon continent for you to taste. Wu Luan's eyes lit up and said, Who said you can't make a fire? Although this place is closed, we dwarves are best at construction. Don't talk about making a fire, we can do everything that can be done outside here. Brother Nianbing, are you tired? If you're not, I want to see what you've made. Nianbing smiled and said, I'm not tired. Let's do it now. I think what I can make will satisfy you. I don't know if the records left by your ancestors mentioned the profession of chef. Wu Luan looked blankly at Nianbing. Obviously, he had never heard of this word. Lotta said with some hesitation, I seem to have heard my mother say that chef is a very sacred profession and is responsible for making food. Nianbing smiled and said, Yes, the process of a chef making food is called cooking, and I am a real chef. Auntie, I'll make some simple food for you to taste now. I don't know how many dwarves you have, it's better to invite them together. It's also lively. Lotta smiled and said, Young man, you have a kind heart. I thank you on behalf of the dwarven companions. Wu Luan, you go and call everyone here. Wu Luan's face was full of excitement. He hurriedly agreed and ran out. As he watched his son leave, Lotta's eyes revealed the benevolence from before. Nianbing, come and sit down. You're tall, it must be very uncomfortable for you to stand here. Nianbing sighed and said, I wish I could feel uncomfortable now. Unfortunately, after becoming a zombie, I can't feel anything. Auntie, I'm poisoned. I don't know if you have gloves here, I'll need them when I make food for you. Lotta shook her head and said, No need. On this continent of gods, it can be said that there's no one who isn't poisonous. After continuous evolution, we're no longer the dwarves of the past. Not to mention us, even the gods or creatures on this continent are not afraid of poison. Corpse poison is nothing. Nianbing nodded and said, So it's like that. Then I'm relieved. Lotta said, Nianbing, are you preparing to go to Death God Waterfall after leaving here? Wu Luan should have already told you that it's a very dangerous place. Nianbing nodded and said, Even if it's dangerous, I have to give it a try. This is my only chance. Moreover, I'm a zombie, the aura of death might not be useful to me. Lotta said, Perhaps. Nianbing, I want to ask you to help me with something, is it possible? Nianbing was surprised and said, Help? Auntie, as long as I can do it, I will do my best to help you. He could feel the deep affection between Lotta and Wu Luan. He was willing to help Lotta without any ulterior motive. Lotta smiled and said, You are indeed a kind human. Although I don't know why you came here, I think that since you can come here, you might not have the ability to go back. If you can recover your vitality and want to go back to Yangon continent, I want to ask you to take halogen with you. Is that possible? Nianbing looked at Lotta in shock. Although he guessed that Lotta's request would not be easy to accomplish, he didn't expect it to be so difficult. He couldn't help but show a trace of hesitation in his eyes. Auntie, you only have halogen as a child. If he leaves, then you. Lotta shook her head and said, Don't worry about me, I'm fine. We dwarves have a very long life. Although we can't compare to those demigod humans, we can still live for about 1,200 years. I am already 1,300 years old this year. I have long surpassed those who deserve to die. Halogen is only 300 years old this year, just like you humans who are in your 20s. So, I don't want him to stay in this hopeless place. Nian Bing frowned slightly and said, Auntie, didn't you say that the dwarves who stayed here lived for faith? Lotta laughed at herself and said, For faith? Yes, for faith. Without faith, I am afraid that we would have died long ago. The reason why I wanted to tell Jean Luan about the past glory of the dwarves was so that he could become an indomitable dwarven hero. However, would a dwarf who was always holed up in a cave become a hero? Your arrival is an opportunity for us. I don't want my child to stay here and live a lonely life like me for thousands of years. I hope that he can go out and see the outside world. Maybe you think that my request is very abrupt, but do you know? Right now there are only 7 dwarves left, including me and Karen, and among the 7 of us, there are only 7 dwarves left. Only Halogen is still in his prime, and I am the only female. In other words, it is impossible for us to reproduce. If we continue like this, the final result will only be extinction. And Halogen, only by leaving here can he have a chance. Nian Bing finally understood Lotta's meaning. She nodded gently and said, Auntie, I know what to do. If I can survive and have a chance to leave here alive, then I will definitely take Halogen with me. As long as I am alive, I will not necessarily protect him. Lotta smiled and said, There is no need to protect him. As the descendant of the dwarf hero, Halogen has the ability to protect himself. Thank you, Nian Bing, although it is only a promise. But I believe that you can do it. If you have any requests, you can put forward them. As long as we can do it, we will certainly satisfy you. Oh, maybe you don't know, we dwarves are the best blacksmiths by nature. Living in this mountain for tens of thousands of years, when we are bored, we can only study blacksmithing. I think, even if our motherland returns to this world, I am afraid that no one can be better at blacksmithing than us remaining old guys, and can make better things. In the face of temptation, Nian Bing just shook her head with a smile and said, Auntie, I don't have any requests to help you. I don't need any requests. If you have any good equipment or things you want, just leave them to Halogen. I think, for him, these things will be more useful. Lotta stared blankly for a moment and said, Nian Bing, maybe you don't understand how precious the things we dwarves make in large quantities are. With our current skills, the things that we make with all our heart can definitely be regarded as divine tools. Don't you want to get them? This is what you deserve. Nian Bing shook her head and said, I treat Halogen as a friend and you as an elder. Since we are friends, it is right to help each other. If I receive something from you, then it will become an employment relationship. The friendship between us will no longer be pure. I don't need anything. I think any foreign object will not have much effect on cultivation, and will have the opposite effect. Only by constantly strengthening one's own cultivation can one become stronger, isn't that so? Well, to be able to understand this truth, you already have the possibility of becoming stronger. You are indeed a good human boy. No wonder Halogen admires you so much. However, if you can control your own mind, and have the help of good weapons in the case of continuous cultivation, it will be more beneficial to the improvement of your strength. Quick, big sister Lotta, let me see what the legendary flatbread looks like. While talking, a group of 6 people came in from outside. From the appearance, Nian Bing could only easily see the age difference of these 6 people. As Lotta said, these 6 people were all men. Except for Halogen, 3 of the other 5 people had hair like Lotta, which was completely white. The 2 people below also had white messy hair. In common, these male dwarves all had messy faces and curly beard. The clothes they wore were all made of animal scales, and the style was very exquisite. Lotta faintly smiled and handed over the pancake in his hand, which was taken by an old dwarf walking at the front. Seeing the legendary pancake, the 5 old dwarves became as excited as Lotta. They looked and smelled the pancake while discussing it. Halogen smiled and whispered to Nienbing, "Brother, these are the elders of my tribe. The magician who just spoke is second only to my mother, Uncle Ruorong. Speaking of which, after so many generations of inheritance, the people here are all relatives. Now there are only 7 of us dwarves left. Just now you were talking with my mother, and you seem to be chatting very enthusiastically." Nienbing glanced at Lotta and smiled. "It's nothing. Aunt Lotta was telling me how excellent your dwarves' skills in smelting are." After listening to Halogen's words, he gradually understood that marriage between close relatives was not a good thing. Although they had this mountain as a base, these dwarves had been marrying each other to reproduce. There would always be problems, so the number of dwarves was getting smaller and smaller. As soon as he heard this, he immediately straightened his chest and said, "Of course, we dwarves are the strongest magicians in smelting, casting, and making. You gave us this legendary flatbread, how about I also give you a piece of clothing? On this continent of gods there are indeed a lot of powerful magical beasts. Their own defensive power is strong, mainly because of the scales on their bodies. If these scales are obtained by us, after special transformation and refining, they can become excellent defensive equipment. I have a lot of materials. I'll make one for you later." Nienbing smiled and said, "There's no hurry. Since you're all here, I'll cook for you first." As soon as they heard that Nienbing was going to cook for them, the dwarves suddenly became excited. Several old dwarves came to Nienbing with flatbread, waiting to see how he would make delicious tokens. Nienbing said to Halogen, "You just said that you can make a fire, then the task of making a fire will be handed over to you." As he said that, he took out a big pot from his space ring, and then took out several kitchen utensils. Next, he took out a bunch of bottles and jars of various seasonings and placed them on the stone table beside him. Looking at Nienbing taking out so many novel things, these dwarves who were born on the continent of gods suddenly became curious, but they were too embarrassed to look closer. However, the light of hope in their eyes lit Nienbing's heart for a long time. Without magic, of course, he couldn't make the best dishes. At the same time, he didn't want to make the best things. These dwarves had been used to eating magical beast meat. If he let them eat the most delicious food at once, he was afraid that they wouldn't be able to stand it. Thinking of this, Nienbing took out 2 cabbages and put them on the chopping board of the stone table. As soon as they saw the cabbages appear, the dwarves exclaimed again and shouted one after another. Was this the legendary green cabbage? Nienbing smiled and took a few flatbread. Then he began his cooking process. What he did was very simple. He cut the cabbages neatly into strips and let Halogen make a fire. With cabbages and flatbread as the main ingredients, he gave the dwarves a stir-fry flatbread. Halogen's way of making a fire was very strange. He took out a yellow crystal and put it on the ground. With a twist of his fingers, a flame suddenly jumped up. The temperature of the fire was very high. If it was an ordinary chef, he might not be able to adapt to such a high-temperature flame. But for Nienbing, this was nothing. Soon, he had begun his cooking process. The light chant of the Wind of Freedom appeared in Nienbing's hand with a blue light, which suddenly illuminated the stone room. Lotta's eyes lit up, but she didn't look at the knife. Her eyes fell on the wind chant stone, and her eyes flickered. She looked at Nienbing and then at the gem, as if she was planning something. Several other dwarves also saw Ao Tiandao. They were also very surprised, but there was a bit of contempt and pity in their eyes. Oil was one of the most important cooking items that Nienbing always carried with him. All the dwarves fell silent when the oil in the pot released a fragrant aroma. They sniffed with all their might, as if they were afraid that the smell would suddenly disappear. Nienbing's movements were very fast. 3 large plates of stir-fry flatbread had appeared on the stone table in a short time. He made a gesture of invitation. "Come on, dwarf seniors, please taste my cooking. although it was just stir-fry flatbread, and although Nian Bing had lost his human senses and couldn't even smell it, as a top chef, how could the food he made be ordinary? Looking at the golden slices of biscuits and the emerald green cabbage, the dwarves swallowed their saliva, but none of them rushed to start first. Lotta was the first to start. She smiled and said, "Come on, don't let Nian Bing's good intentions fall through." With that, she was the first to reach out, and regardless of the temperature of the stir-fry flatbread, she grabbed a handful and stuffed it into her mouth. As soon as she moved, the other dwarves immediately moved. Nian Bing only felt a blur in front of his eyes, and the first enemy began to chew in his mouth. The process of the dwarves chewing was very long, and they were completely immersed in the enjoyment of the delicious food. Gradually, their faces were covered with tears. When they swallowed the stir-fry flatbread into their stomachs, they all knelt down one by one, prostrating themselves on the ground and whispering something. After a long time, Lotta led the dwarves to stand up again. She wiped the tears on her face and looked deeply at Nian Bing, saying, "Thank you, Nian Bing. We will never forget your help to us dwarves." Nian Bing hurriedly said, "Auntie, you don't have to be so polite. It's just a simple meal." Lotta's face sank and said, "Maybe it's nothing to you, but for us dwarves, the significance of these stir-fry flatbread is completely different. You know, although we are dwarves, we were born here and grew up here. Our knowledge of the outside world is only limited to the radius of a few hundred miles around this holy mountain. We all know from legends that we once had a homeland, but none of us have seen what our homeland looks like. We have all doubted it, we have all been anxious, but it is our unyielding belief that has supported us to live until now. This food is no longer a simple food. It tells us that everything really exists. The Yangon continent exists, and so does our lost continent. It gives us more confidence to live, more confidence to wait for the return of our homeland." Nian Bing kept nodding and said, "Auntie, I understand what you mean. I'm sorry, it was my fault just now." Lotta shook her head and said, "No, it's nothing. Come on, my people, let us have a good meal similar to our homeland, let us remember this taste forever." Chapter 169. The 4 plates of fried pancakes quickly disappeared under the quick movements of the 7 dwarves. They did not even leave a trace, and even the oil stains on the plates were licked clean. Seeing this, Nian Bing did not feel any sense of ridicule in her heart. On the contrary, she respected these dwarves even more. Yes, as they themselves said, what supported them was their unyielding faith. The other dwarves left one after another, leaving only Lotta and her son in the stone room, as well as the old dwarf named Ruorong. Ruorong said, "The weather outside is very bad, and I'm afraid the magic storm will only end in a few days. This time, the thunder element outbreak is very serious, and even has a certain degree of damage to the outside of our holy mountain. Nian Bing, it seems that you will have to stay with us for a while. You can only leave here after the magic storm is over. However, do you really want to go to the Death God waterfall?" Nian Bing nodded and said, "Even if the hope is slim, how do you know it won't work if you don't try? I must go to the Death God waterfall in order to survive." Lotta smiled and said, "Well said. Nian Bing, I believe you will succeed. By the way, when you were cutting the pancakes, I saw your knife. Can you take it out and let me see it again?" Nian Bing's heart moved, and she hurriedly summoned the wind of freedom from her space ring, proud heaven blade. The cyan light shone in the stone room. There was no greed in the eyes of the 3 dwarves in the room. Almost at the same time, they all frowned, especially Halogen. He looked at proud heaven blade, then looked at Nian Bing and sighed, "What a waste! Nian Bing, how did you refine this knife? What a waste, what a waste!" Nian Bing froze for a moment, then said, "Waste? This knife was given to me by someone else. I didn't refine it myself. Why, is the material of the horse not good? But I heard that this knife is made of the best lapis lazuli, and the gem on the knife is also the best wind-chanting stone of the wind attribute." Lotta shook her head. He said, You didn't understand what he meant. He didn't say that your saber wasn't good, but that the refinement wasn't good. The materials of this saber are undoubtedly the best, but the refinement method is very problematic. It doesn't fully display the spirituality of the saber. He couldn't even use the wind chant stone to its full potential. Therefore, it is just a saber in your hand. According to my estimation, it's already not bad if it can only use half of its magic power. Nian Bing frowned. So you're saying that if this saber is reforged, it should become even better? However, it was already a divine tool. Was it still possible for it to break through? Chang Rong smiled and said, Nian Bing, it seems like you really don't know anything about refining. This isn't just a matter of refining. Moreover, divine artifacts were not the best tools. In terms of refining, it was just like cultivation. There was no end to it. If he could fully utilize these materials, it could at least become a super divine artifact. Unfortunately, it was already very difficult now. Super divine artifact. These three words immediately made Nian Bing's heart move. For a long time, most of his strength came from his magic saber. If the power of the magic saber could be increased, then his overall strength would definitely increase by a lot. Even those shadow puppets of his could reach a new level. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but say, Senior Chang Rong, is there no other way? Can't I change my profession? Halogen rushed to say, Nian Bing, this saber has already fused with blood and qi. The various materials of the saber have already completely fused together. It's almost impossible to change your profession. It's a pity that such good materials don't even have a saber soul. It's really a pity. That's why I said that you were wasting God's gift. Saber soul? What's that? Nian Bing asked curiously. Halogen said, the so-called saber soul refers to a tool above divine tool. If it's refined properly, it will have its own soul. Only tools with souls can be called true divine tools, or even super divine artifact. Hearing his words, Nian Bing couldn't help but think of the first time he met Jia Ji's friend who was called Xiao Padao. He said that the soul of the saber should be referring to something. However, his magic sabers clearly had spirituality. Why did Halogen say that his saber didn't have a saber soul? Chang Rong said, Nian Bing, the forging method of us dwarves is very different from that of you humans. If I say that our forging method is the best, maybe you won't be convinced. However, there's one thing I can tell you. Only us dwarves have ever refined a super divine artifact. At that time, it was because we dwarves sacrificed 167 master craftsmen to forge 12 super divine artifacts that the Lost Empire could rely on to fight against the godly mainland. To refine a real super divine artifact, you need to use your own soul to refine it. If this saber of yours only fell into my hands as a material, maybe I really can't help but gamble with my own life. Nian Bing saw the burning excitement in Chang Rong's eyes. He was a little puzzled, but soon felt relieved. Yes, as a blacksmith, what could be more exciting than crafting the best weapon? In order to persist in the pursuit, life was no longer the most important thing. Thinking of this point, his respect for the dwarves in front of him increased a little. Halogen said, It's a pity that these sabers don't have a real soul. Just having spirituality is not enough. If you can cultivate a saber soul from the spirituality, it's possible to transform it. As for whether it will succeed, it's hard to say. Nian Bing said, I still have a few sabers here. They are both my kitchen knives and my magic staff. This time I met you guys, it can be considered an opportunity. Can you help me see the degree of refining these sabers? If it can be slightly changed without harming you, it's naturally the best. After coming to the continent of gods, Nian Bing felt more and more that his strength was not enough. Although his own cultivation was important, as Chang Rong said, if he could have a good weapon, coupled with his own cultivation, he would be able to go to a better place. Rays of light appeared on the stone table. The sigh of the ice goddess, the roar of the god of fire, the whisper of the wind of freedom, the melody of the earth's awakening, the 6 rays of light, the dawn that penetrated the heaven and earth, and the curse of eternal hell appeared one after another. For a time, the whole stone room was full of treasure light, and the 3 dwarves were all stunned. Prodigal, really prodigal! How many good things are these? How did it become like this? This time, even the calm Lotta couldn't help but sigh. Looking at the 7 sabers in front of her, her eyes were full of emotion and dissatisfaction. Nian Bing said with some embarrassment, "I really don't know much about refining. Is it not good to refine these sabers?" Chang Rong said, "It's not that they are all bad. Among these sabers, only this one can be regarded as a real saber in our eyes." As he said that, he pointed to the curse of hell. Nian Bing was stunned. He said, "Why? But I don't feel that it is different from the other sabers." Chang Rong smiled lightly and said, "The difference is big. This saber is refined with the heart and soul. Even if we dwarf masters were to refine it, it wouldn't be much better. The most precious thing is that when this saber was being refined, its master's blood essence was completely refined. It was completely refined from the blood of its master, the earth core. That was why the materials had such a high degree of fusion. I believe that this saber must have its own saber soul, and it must be very powerful. Compared to the other sabers you have, it's much stronger." Nian Bing looked at the demon-devouring saber, and his eyes couldn't help but show a trace of hesitation. Because at this moment, he thought of the shadow puppet that would be out of his control. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "If there is a saber soul, how should I use it? Will it not accept my control?" Chang Rong said, "Of course not. If the saber soul doesn't recognize you, you can't use this saber at all. Didn't you see that we didn't touch your saber? The other sabers are better. I'm afraid that the saber soul of this black saber has always been awakened. If an outsider touches it, it is very likely that there will be a backlash effect. Don't worry about this saber. But your other 6 sabers are really rotten. Only this saber that exudes the aura of light is slightly better, and the energy is relatively pure. AI, so many good materials, even on the continent of gods, it is difficult to find. I didn't expect that they would be wasted like this. If these things were refined by us, I can be sure that they can all become super divine weapons and be passed down for hundreds of generations." Taking a deep breath, Nian Bing smiled slightly. He said, "Maybe I'm too greedy. It doesn't matter. I'm already lucky to have them. Why should I ask for more? Thank you for your guidance. If I come across any good materials in the future, I will definitely send them to you and ask you to refine them." Lotta suddenly raised her head and looked at Nian Bing. When Nian Bing's gaze met hers, she suddenly felt that Lotta's gaze was a little strange. Nodding slightly, Lotta said, "Nian Bing, when you go to the Death God waterfall, can you leave these 6 sabers behind? I will try and see if I can help you make them stronger." Nian Bing stared blankly for a moment, then said, "But didn't Senior Chang Rong say—" Lotta raised her hand to stop Nian Bing from continuing, "I have a way. You don't have to worry about it. Maybe I can help you change the nature of these 7 sabers. The Death God waterfall is filled with the aura of death. Over there, I'm afraid that only this black saber will be of help to you. The other sabers will easily have the opposite effect. After all, the aura of death there is too strong. Do you trust me?" Nian Bing furrowed his brows and said, "Auntie, I trust you, but to be honest, these 7 swords are half of my strength. If I leave them here, I'm afraid that if we meet with other dangers before we reach Death God Waterfall, I'm afraid—" Lotta shook her head and said, "No, you don't have to be afraid of anything. I will let Halogen go with you. He is very familiar with the surrounding terrain. With him, you won't encounter too many dangers and will be able to reach the Death God Waterfall. Of course, after reaching there, everything else will depend on your own effort. At that time, Halogen will not be able to enter." Nian Bing thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, then I will leave these 6 sabers behind. The reason why he wasn't willing to use the saber was mainly because of his shadow puppets. Without the saber, the shadow puppets wouldn't be able to be used. Right now, his biggest reliance, other than his mental power, would be the shadow puppets that he still had. But since he had already decided, he would not regret it. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Since I want to leave the sabers behind, then I will also leave the ability attached to the sabers behind. Perhaps you have already guessed that I am an all-round mage in the human world. I once used my magic to fuse with these 7 sabers to create 7 shadow puppets, so that they can use these 7 sabers to exert a powerful attack under the control of my spiritual power." As he said that, Nian Bing's Tian Yen point flashed. Except for the shadow puppet, the other 6 shadow puppets appeared almost at the same time, which suddenly gave the 3 dwarves a fright. "Saber soul!" the 3 dwarves exclaimed almost at the same time. Nian Bing was stunned and said, "This is just my magic, not some saber soul." Lotta smiled. "It seems that I still underestimated you. Nian Bing, I can tell you accurately that these so-called shadow puppets are actually saber souls. They have sabers as their bodies, innate chi as their bodies, and they have the ability of their own system. If they are not saber souls, then what are they? It's just that these are the lowest level of saber souls, and they don't have their own consciousness. Well, with these saber souls, it will be much easier to change the path." On the side, Rong suddenly said, "Big sister, have you really decided?" Lotta smiled slightly and said, "It's not easy to come across good materials, how can I not try? In my life, most of my efforts have been devoted to studying the art of smelting. It's not easy to get this opportunity, I will never give it up." Rong also smiled. "Well, then we will accompany Big Sister to try. Indeed, it would be a pity if these good materials were wasted. Nian Bing, don't worry, we are already much better than the people of 10,000 years ago. In terms of smelting and forging, I am afraid that there is no one in the world who is better than us. You can rest assured and leave the saber here. When you and Halogen come back, you will definitely see a brand new treasure saber." Nian Bing nodded and said, "I believe in you. Then I will have to trouble Auntie and Senior Rong." As he said that, under the control of the power of concentration, he ordered his shadow puppets to fuse into the gem on the saber one after another. As soon as the shadow puppets fused with the saber, the light on the saber suddenly became different. The light was not strong, but it was a little dimmer, but that dim light was constantly fluctuating, and its spirituality increased several times. Putting away the demon-devouring saber, Nian Bing thought to herself that she could only rely on this saber to go to the Death God waterfall. Time passed very quickly, and in the blink of an eye 3 days had passed. During these 3 days, Nian Bing took out all the food she had on her and made the best food for the 7 dwarves to taste. The dwarves were also not polite. They tasted the delicious food and praised Nian Bing greatly. From their words, Nian Bing learned that the green lizard was the most sensitive magical beast on the continent of gods. It was also the weakest of all magical beasts. It could only attack with its body. If it were not for the fact that it could feed on soil containing minerals, it would have gone extinct long ago. It was precisely because of the weakness of the green lizard that it became the main food of most of the gods on the continent of gods, and the dwarves were no exception. However, it was even easier for the dwarves to kill the green lizards than it was for Nian Bing. They could tear the green lizards apart with just their physical bodies. The continent of gods was indeed a place where all races could quickly stock up on supplies. Although life here was painful, as long as one could persist in the pain, the harvest was equally great. Ling Nian Bing felt a little strange. Although Lotta often asked the dwarves to discuss something together these days, they never helped her refine the 6 sabers. She did not have any doubts about Lotta and the others, but she felt a little strange in her heart. In particular, when Lotta and the others were studying the refining method of the magic saber, they did not ask her and Halogen to listen, which seemed very mysterious. In these 3 days, the happiest person was probably Halogen. Eating the food made by Nian Bing every day, he was very happy. These legendary foods were an eye-opener for him. When Nian Bing was not cultivating, she would tell him some of the things that happened to her in the Yangon continent, which made Halogen yearn for the outside world. Just as Halogen said, the dwarf's home in the mountains was built very wonderfully. Not only did it have ventilation, but it could even observe everything outside through some special positions. At the same time, it was completely isolated from the outside world. Those observation holes were made of special crystals, which were enough to isolate the magic breath outside. Through the observation holes, they could understand all the changes outside. Early morning of the 4th day. The magic storm finally stopped. According to Lada, the day after the magic storm ended was the most harmonious time in the continent of gods. On this day, the magic elements in the air would become very restless. It was the most suitable time to go out. Lada called Nian Bing and Halogen to the stone room. After a few simple words, she let them leave the dwarves' cave in the mountains. Brine accompanied Nian Bing to the death god waterfall. Halogen's outfit today was very different from usual. He wore a set of full body armor, which was completely black. The armor looked very thick, but Nian Bing had tried the weight of the armor before. It was so light that he could not believe it. Although the armor covered every part of Halogen's body, it did not affect his joints at all. According to Halogen, this armor was originally the armor of the dwarves' hero. After years of continuous improvement by the dwarves' master forger, it had reached the level of a super artifact. Its defense was extremely strong. Breathing the much calmer air and looking at the still cloudy sky, Nian Bing could not help but show a smile. "Halogen, where should we go?" he asked the dwarf warrior beside him. Halogen said, "This is simple. We don't need to climb the mountain. We just need to go around it. You don't know, but the 2 mountains we have to pass through are extremely terrible. In the red mountain in front of us there is a very powerful magic beast called Jabi." "Jabi?" Nian Bing asked curiously, "Isn't Jabi the name of the human archer?" Halogen said with a dignified face, "That's where their name comes from. The Jabi on the red mountain is a monster similar to a lion, but they have a red horn on their forehead. This horn can shoot out a fire element death ray. That kind of purple light is very terrible. Your body absolutely can't resist it. The most unbearable thing is that these annoying Jabi's light rays have the ability to track. No matter how fast you are, you can't escape their attack. To compete with them, the requirement for defense is very high. Jabi is one of the 4 most annoying creatures on the continent of gods. Jabi alone is not very strong. Even if I don't wear armor, I can easily destroy it. However, their numbers are second only to the green lizards. When they go out, there are dozens of them. Moreover, they are vengeful. Once you offend them, they will not rest until you are dead. Therefore, it is best for us to hide to avoid danger." Nian Bing nodded and said, "You are the master. Of course, I will listen to you. Then let's go. While the magic elements in the air are slightly agitated, we should try to reach the Death God waterfall as soon as possible." Mi Luan nodded. He tapped his feet on the ground and ran down the mountain. Nian Bing leaped up and hurriedly caught up with him. Halogen's way of moving forward was different from Nian Bing's. His jumping power was not strong, but his running speed was very fast. He accelerated at full speed. A series of faint afterimages could be seen in the air. Although the terrain in front of him was very complicated, it was as easy as walking on flat ground for him. In the blink of an eye, he had pulled a long distance away from Nian Bing. Although Nian Bing chased after him together, the distance between them was getting longer and longer. Halogen had no choice but to stop and wait for him. After a while, the 2 had left the sacred mountain of the dwarves and came to the red mountain. Halogen simply identified the direction and went around the left side of the red mountain. As he ran, he explained to Nian Bing that the possibility of encountering Zhe in this direction was the least, and it was the best way to go. The fire elements around the Red Mountain were obviously much stronger than other places. Nian Bing could even feel a scorching breath constantly hitting her face. With Halogen leading the way, he did not need to spread out his psychic power to explore the surrounding situation. He just left his psychic power on the surface of his skin to protect his body. He followed Halogen quickly from the side of the Red Mountain. Soon, they had bypassed half of the Red Mountain. On the way, they did not encounter anything. Halogen said to Nian Bing that because the Red Mountain was the territory of Zhe, even the more powerful magical beasts would not come here to provoke them. After all, there were too few magical beasts that could deal with Zhe's revenge. Even if those more powerful magical beasts had the ability to completely destroy Zhe, the damage to themselves would be very great. In such a harsh environment as the continent of gods, the higher the level of magical beasts, the higher their intelligence. Naturally, they would not do anything that would harm others without benefiting themselves. Just when Nian Bing was about to breathe a sigh of relief, a change finally happened. A low roar came from the right side, and a red figure floated in front of them, blocking the way of Nian Bing and Zhang Han. Nian Bing looked over and saw that it was a fiery red lion in front of them. Seeing this Zhe, Nian Bing not only did not feel afraid, but also felt a sense of familiarity in her heart. A fiery red lion, wasn't it in line with her grandfather's nickname? The Flaming Lion King. Unexpectedly, there really was a fiery red lion. The lion in front of them looked extremely mighty. It was twice as big as an ordinary lion. The fiery red hair was like a burning flame, especially the hair on the head. It looked like a huge ball of fire. It was constantly expanding. The sharp horn on its forehead was about a foot long. It shone with a reddish-gold light, adding a bit of a divine aura. Halogen stopped, looked at Zhe in front of him, and let out a low roar. Zhe did not seem to be afraid of Halogen. It raised its head and roared angrily, its left front paw digging into the ground. The anger in its dark red eyes was obvious, as if it was angry that Nian Bing and Lin Luan had intruded into its territory. Nian Bing looked at Halogen and said, "What do we do now? Do we attack?" Halogen hesitated for a moment. He was still very concerned about Zhe's revenge. He hesitated and shook his head, saying, "Nian Bing, I will block it, you go around it, and then I will chase after you. Zhe's speed is fast, but it's not as fast as mine. As long as it doesn't attract too many Zhe, it won't be a threat." Nian Bing nodded and said, "Okay, then it's up to you." At this time, hesitation was fatal. He believed in Halogen's strength. At that moment, he and Halogen looked at each other, and immediately rushed forward. At the same time, Halogen had already arrived in front of Zhe. With his full strength, Nian Bing realized that Halogen's speed could reach such a terrifying level. It was almost comparable to a short-distance teleportation. In a flash, he was already in front of Zhe. He did not take down the battle axe at his waist, and directly punched towards Zhe's head. Zhe let out a low roar and suddenly raised its two front paws, directly slapping towards Halogen's body. Halogen did not dodge Zhe's attack, but he did not dodge, and met Zhe's attack head-on. With a bang, Zhe's huge body was actually thrown out by Halogen's physical strength, and hit the stone wall at the side, letting out a loud bang. All of this happened very quickly. When Halogen shook off Zhe's attack, Nian Bing just happened to rush past him, heading towards the other side of Red Mountain at full speed. Halogen did not move, and his eyes were fixed on Zhe. Zhe seemed to be angered by Halogen, and let out an even louder roar. Lowering its forehead, a purple ray of light shot towards Halogen. Although Nian Bing had already flown past, he could clearly feel that the purple ray of light was actually heavenly fire, real heavenly fire. This was heavenly fire that could only be released by a forbidden fire spell of the 11th step. He still hesitated, because he was worried that Halogen would not be able to deal with other attacks. His forward speed suddenly slowed down, and he turned around to look at Halogen. Facing the attack of heavenly fire, Halogen appeared very calm, and still stood there. When the heavenly fire was about to reach him, he once again punched out, and the black Do Chi accompanied his tyrannical punch, letting out a thunderous explosion in the air. With a bang, not only did the heavenly fire disperse, the aftermath of the Do Chi shook the Je to the point that it cried out in grief, rolling on the ground, and actually fainted. Halogen's expression suddenly changed, and he raised his head to look up. What he saw was a red cloud of dust. Of course, it was not dust, but at least hundreds of Je were rushing in his direction. Letting out an angry roar, Halogen did not stay any longer, and his figure flashed to Nian Bing's side, and he carried Nian Bing on his broad shoulders. Exerting strength in his legs, he increased his speed to the limit, and madly rushed forward. When Nian Bing reacted, she saw a purple ray of light, and hundreds of heavenly fire converged into one in the air. The air around the heavenly fire seemed to be boiling, and in the midst of the distortion, it chased after her and Halogen. Halogen did not look back, but it was as if he had eyes on the back of his head. In the instant when the heavenly fire was within 10 feet of them, he suddenly leaped high and forcefully threw Nian Bing away. At the same time, his body flipped in the air, and the black battle axe that was in Lotta's hand appeared in his hand. He let out a monstrous roar, and a frenzied battle intent shook the air. Both of his hands held the battle axe handle, and with his belt on his back, his arm on his back, his arm on his hand and his hand on the axe, a strong black light, as if splitting the heavens and earth, came crashing down towards the heavenly fire. The black armor on his body burned with a black flame, and the surging battle intent stimulated his Do Chi to become even stronger. With a puff, the heavenly fire was split in two in front of the black light, and the black light surged out like a black dragon, and welcomed the Je beasts that were chasing after them. The Je beasts seemed to feel that this black light could not be underestimated, and immediately used their fastest speed to separate to the side. In the blink of an eye, the black light, which was shaped like the face of an axe, swept across 100 feet of space, and heavily chopped on the Red Mountain. A series of dense roars came, and a corner of the Red Mountain was unexpectedly broken by this axe. A large amount of red powder filled the air, and shrouded the Je beasts, so that they could not sense the position of Halogen and Nian Bing. Nian Bing's body was thrown 100 feet away by Halogen. When his body was still in the air, he had already seen everything clearly. When he was about to land, Halogen had already floated over, and once again carried him on his shoulder. In the blink of an eye, they had already passed the range of the Red Mountain, and quickly ran forward. Nian Bing's heart was beating wildly. What kind of strength was this? For a few days, Halogen had always been a simple and honest dwarf in his heart. However, everything he had just shown, he was afraid that all the legendary god masters of the human world were just like this. No, even a god master would not be able to split the heavenly fire with such a high degree of condensation in one go, and also split the Red Mountain. God! Could it be that all the creatures on the continent of gods were as strong as Halogen? If it was true, then what were the so-called strong people on the continent of Yangon? Chapter 170. Halogen ran for a long distance before slowing down. Panting heavily, he placed Nian Bing on the ground. Damn, that was close. Fortunately, we didn't let those things surround us. Otherwise, the two of us would have been in big trouble. Nian Bing looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. I'm afraid I'm the only one in trouble. With your strength, it wouldn't have been difficult for you to run away from those things. Halogen shook his head and opened the helmet on his face. He spat out a mouthful of blood. Those things are stronger than you think. Not only are their attacks with horns very strong, the impact is also very strong. Just now, after blocking so many attacks, I was slightly injured. Fortunately, I've been working hard on my cultivation all these years. Otherwise, if I was just a little slower and they caught up, it would have been very difficult for me to run away. Do you know? Just now, half of the impact of their attacks was neutralized by this set of armor on my body. The dwarf divine armor, the most precious treasure of the dwarf race, is not so easy to break through. Nian Bing smiled. It seems that without your help, it would have been impossible for me to run away from those things. Halogen smiled foolishly and said, Don't underestimate yourself. Actually, I can feel that your spiritual power is very strong. You're the strongest person I've ever seen. Even the master gods I've seen before are not much stronger than you. Unfortunately, you're now in the body of a zombie, so you can't fully use your spiritual power. Otherwise, these things wouldn't have been able to stop you. I just don't know how your spiritual power compares to those true gods. Nian Bing smiled bitterly. That's incomparable. Alright. Let's not talk about this anymore. You rest for a while, we'll continue on our way. Halogen nodded. He sat down on the ground and began to cultivate. Nian Bing didn't dare to be careless. She opened up her spiritual power and laid down a layer of seal in a radius of 10 feet to protect Halogen, so that he would not be disturbed by outside interference. Halogen's strength caused Nian Bing's thirst for power to grow even stronger. Judging by Halogen's appearance, even if he couldn't compare to those main gods, he probably wasn't that far off. When would she be able to reach that level as well? Even if one reached his level of strength, there were still the high and mighty true gods. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel slightly agitated in his heart, and the bloodthirsty feeling at the bottom of his heart showed signs of becoming restless. The spread of his spiritual power made Nian Bing extremely sensitive to his surroundings. Halogen had just entered a meditative state when he suddenly felt that something was wrong. At this time, he and Halogen were in a plain. The surrounding ground was black soil and black rock. It looked rugged, and it was a stretch to call it a plain. The feeling of his spiritual power came from a rock hundreds of feet away. It seemed to be the aura of life. Nian Bing's heart tightened. He opened his Tian Yen acupoint and focused his attention in that direction. At the same time, he summoned his demon-devouring blade from his space ring. Under the full attention of his Tian Yen acupoint, he finally saw the source of his uneasiness. He couldn't help but gasp. It wasn't a rock, but the back of an unknown monster. From the feedback of his spiritual power, the monster's body was at least 14 or 15 feet long. Just the exposed back alone was 7 or 8 feet long. The monster's aura was very unstable. From its attributes, it seemed to be an Earth-type monster. Nian Bing secretly hoped that this monster would continue to sleep and never wake up. As long as Halogen finished cultivating, the two of them could leave immediately. After seeing the strange sights of the continent of gods, he was wary of monsters. Things didn't go as planned. Things did not go as he wished. Just as a sliver of hope appeared in Nian Bing's heart, the monster moved. Its huge back slowly rose up, and its body, which was more than 10 feet long, drilled out of the ground. It revealed its entire appearance. It was a greenish-gray monster that was about 15 feet long. From its appearance, it looked like a giant python. However, this python had a dragon head and 8 pairs of horns under its abdomen. As soon as it emerged from the ground, Nian Bing immediately smelled a foul stench. If even a zombie could smell the stench, it was obvious that this monster was extremely weak. Its body was dripping with gray mucus. As it slowly turned its body, the pair of gray eyes on the dragon's head stared at Nian Bing. A murderous glint flashed in its eyes. Nian Bing knew that he couldn't wait any longer. There was no such thing as luck on the continent of gods. This monster would definitely not let the two of them go. Gritting his teeth, he suddenly jumped out. He didn't pounce on the monster, but quickly moved in another direction. The first thing he needed to do was to completely focus the monster's attention on him, so that he could smoothly complete his cultivation. The monster did as Nian Bing wished. Its huge head slowly turned in the direction he moved. Suddenly, the monster let out a low roar. Its body suddenly shrank, and then suddenly bounced. Its body, which was more than 10 feet long, seemed to have no weight at all. Its 8 pairs of horns simultaneously exerted force on the ground, bringing up a cloud of black dust. Suddenly, it rushed towards Nian Bing's direction. Its speed was so fast that it didn't pale in comparison to the movements that Nian Bing had seen before. With a flash of light, Nian Bing's body jumped to the side like lightning. At the same time, he suddenly waved the devouring demon blade in his hand, bringing along an aura of death. He had turned into a zombie. The might of the devouring demon blade was clearly easier to use. Although he couldn't use dark magic, the aura of death in his body was amplified several times under the devouring demon blade's amplification. A gray stream of air welcomed the monster's huge body. Unfortunately, the aura of death was like a flea tickling. It only left a faint mark on the gray scales of the monster's body. The monster's huge body strangely twisted. The lower half of its body suddenly swung the upper half of its body, and heavily smashed towards Nian Bing's waist. At this time, Nian Bing knew that he had no choice but to fight with all his might. The Tian Yen acupoint between his eyebrows instantly emitted a 7-colored light. The strange eye opened once again. A huge amount of spiritual energy formed a solid 7-colored light and suddenly shot towards the monster's large eyes. The monster noticed the 7-colored light. The upper half of its body that was swinging over suddenly stopped in midair. Then, the same strange thing happened. Its pair of eyes actually turned green in an instant. 2 jade green lights instantly met the spiritual energy that shot out from Nian Bing's Tian Yen acupoint. The two forces collided in midair without making any sound. Nian Bing only felt a violent tremor in his Tian Yen acupoint. His brain instantly became dizzy. He couldn't help but open his mouth and spit out a puff of gray gas. The faint green light that his body emitted from eating the green lizard disappeared. The aura of death was also greatly weakened. A strong sense of weakness instantly spread throughout his body. Even the light in his Tian Yen acupoint dimmed a lot. A monstrous roar rang out when Nian Bing regained his consciousness. Nian Bing only felt his whole body shake. He was already heavily hit by the monster's upper body. His body drew a parabola in the air and flew hundreds of feet before landing heavily on the ground. Although he had the body of a zombie and had been changed by the dragon's soul, this fall still almost made him dizzy. The spiritual power in his mind was in a temporary mess due to the violent tremors. However, his spiritual power was strong after all. Although his body had suffered a heavy blow, his spiritual power quickly stabilized. Nian Bing suddenly realized that this zombie's body was not bad. At least he didn't feel pain. If he was still a human, he was afraid that just the pain of his body alone would have made him faint. What made him even more gratified was that his tyrannical defense prevented him from breaking a single bone. As soon as his spiritual energy solidified, he immediately rolled on the ground and stood up again. He was ready to receive another attack from the monster. The monster did not attack Nian Bing again. When Nian Bing stood up again, he just happened to see its huge body rolling on the ground. It seemed to be in extreme pain. Its pair of big green eyes kept flashing. Every time, a layer of gray mucus would spray out from its body. It roared in pain again and again to show its current state. Seeing this scene, Nian Bing couldn't help but be stunned. This monster couldn't be suffering from a sudden illness, right? This thought only flashed through his mind for a moment. He was immediately amused by this idiotic thought of his. If the monsters on the godly mainland could get sick, then pigs would be able to fly. Of course, he didn't know that Kitty's little pig Guan was already able to fly. Since it wasn't suffering from an illness, could it be that the monster's current state was because of his attack just now? Nian Bing's memory returned to the previous moment. Although he didn't clearly see what happened in that instant, he was able to gather all his spiritual energy. However, he was certain that the spiritual attack he had hurriedly launched had gathered all of his spiritual power. That arrow-shaped spiritual power was the strongest piercing attack he could launch. Could it be that this was the attack that seriously injured the monster? When he thought of this, Nian Bing couldn't help but feel more confident in himself. He focused on the state of his spiritual power, and realized that even though he had expended quite a bit of it, it wasn't as much as he had imagined. Only about 10% of his spiritual power was recovering as the specks of starlight rapidly circled around him. This discovery made him even more confident. Nian Bing had always understood the principle of taking advantage of an enemy's weakness. Without any hesitation, he flew back to the monster's side. In an instant, he condensed his spiritual energy and once again launched a physical attack on the monster. He didn't know that being able to condense spiritual energy into a physical state was also an incredible thing on the godly mainland. There was almost no one who was willing to use physical spiritual energy to launch an attack. One had to know that a human's spiritual energy was very weak. Moreover, it was closely related to one's soul. The cultivation of spiritual energy was much more difficult than the cultivation of the physical body. Even if one's spiritual energy could condense into a physical state, no one would be willing to use it to attack others. Otherwise, once one's spiritual energy was damaged, then it wouldn't just be the spiritual energy that would be damaged. At the same time, it would also threaten one's soul. That was much more serious than physical damage. There was even the possibility of one becoming an idiot. If it was in the past, Nian Bing wouldn't be willing to use his spiritual energy to launch an attack. However, the current him could only rely on his spiritual energy. In a situation where there was no other way, he could only choose to use his strongest ability to launch an attack. He didn't expect that it would actually work. It heavily injured the seemingly powerful monster in front of him. The substantial rainbow divine light flashed once again. The light split into two and pierced into the monster's large eyes that flickered with green light like lightning. This time, Nian Bing didn't encounter any resistance. His spiritual energy was like two sharp knives that directly pierced into the monster's spiritual world. As Nian Bing's will and the evil aura exploded, the monster's twisted body instantly spasmed. In the next moment, it completely stopped moving. With a loud bang, the giant head completely exploded, bringing green blood everywhere. Fortunately, Nian Bing dodged in time, so it didn't splash on his body. The biggest difference between a spiritual attack and a physical attack was that spiritual energy didn't directly attack the enemy's body. Instead, after completely destroying the enemy's spirit, it was like a fuse that caused the enemy's energy to go berserk. Therefore, no matter how strong the physical attack was, once the opponent's spirit collapsed, it would be difficult to escape the fate of destruction. This was the case for the much weaker green lizard, and it was the same for the giant monster in front of him. No matter how strong its body's defense was, it couldn't withstand the explosion of its own energy from inside out. The spiritual energy of magical beasts couldn't be compared to that of humans. No matter how high their intelligence was, they couldn't deliberately cultivate their spiritual energy. Nian Bing's spiritual energy had already reached the level of physical attack and was the nemesis of all magical beasts. It should be known that the stronger the physical defense of a magical beast, the weaker its spiritual energy would be. The monster's huge body was left intact except for its head. As its head exploded, a green bead floated into the air. Nian Bing's spiritual energy moved. Using his spiritual energy as a thread, he tied the bead and pulled it in front of him. It was a bead the size of a fist. Unlike the green lizard, this bead was full of moist air but didn't have the smell of blood. The warm bead was like the monster's green eyes, constantly flashing. Nian Bing could clearly feel that this bead contained a huge amount of energy. Delighted, he didn't think much about it. He opened his mouth wide and stuffed the bead into his mouth, forcefully swallowing it. In his mind, this was also something like a core. With his zombie body, eating it would only benefit him. As soon as the bead entered his stomach, Nian Bing immediately felt a hot stream of air flowing down his throat. Even though his zombie body couldn't feel any pain, he still felt dizzy as the stream of air grew hotter and hotter. What was going on? Could it be that this bead was poisonous? That's impossible. Even if it was poisonous, his zombie body wouldn't be afraid. The bead in his stomach was getting hotter and hotter. Gradually, Nian Bing felt that something was wrong. Because that hot feeling wasn't coming from his body, but from his spiritual energy. His zombie body had already lost all sense of feeling. How could it feel hot? Understanding this, he couldn't help but feel a trace of fear. He didn't dare to delay, and hurriedly sat cross-legged on the ground, concentrating all the spiritual energy in his Tian Yen acupoint to feel the changes in his body. When Nian Bing closed his eyes, his body had already begun to change. The body that was filled with the smell of death first grew the gray scales of a dragon's body. Very quickly, the gray scales began to mutate. The scales gradually expanded to twice their original size, densely covering his body, and became thicker. Then, the color of these scales began to change, from gray to green, and finally to jade green. If a normal person saw Nian Bing's current appearance, they would probably think that his body was covered in a layer of jade. Yes, those were sparkling and translucent scales like jade. Precious light flowed on the scales, emitting a layer of faint green light, protecting Nian Bing within a foot of his body. Even his long gray hair had turned dark green. Streaks of dark green electricity flowed around his body, and the zombie body began to mutate again. Different from the external changes of his body, Nian Bing's spiritual energy was suffering intense torment, and the burning sensation was becoming more and more intense. Waves of scorching heat invaded his Tian Yen acupoint from all directions. Ling Nian Bing couldn't understand what was happening. His powerful spiritual energy didn't have the slightest effect on these waves of heat. He could only watch as these faint green waves of heat entered his Tian Yen acupoint and merged with the starry sky in his mind. The intense heat made Nian Bing feel so uncomfortable that he wanted to scream, but at this time, he couldn't scream at all. The light in his Tian Yen acupoint flickered continuously, and the ice and fire fusion balls spun 3 times faster in an instant. The surrounding starry sky also spun violently with the changes. Hot, so hot, so hot. Even when he was in the nightmare teleportation magic, it wasn't as uncomfortable as now. That almost non-existent heat flow continued to evaporate Nian Bing's body. His hands with dark red fingernails also began to change. His bones increased in size, and his hands looked bigger. Fine scales extended all the way to his fingertips, and his dark red fingernails turned into a sparkling green color. They flickered with a faint light, and grew another 2 inches, reaching 5 inches in length. Stimulated by his spiritual energy, Ling Nian Bing only had one thought in his mind, and that was to never eat anything in the future. In this world, not everything could be eaten. While thinking, Nian Bing's consciousness began to become a bit confused. Ever since his spiritual energy materialized, this was the first time he had this kind of feeling. His heart trembling, Nian Bing understood that he must not lose control of his body, let alone fall asleep. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would never wake up again. Thinking of this, he controlled his spiritual energy and forcefully stimulated the starry sky formed by the fusion of ice and spiritual energy. A cold feeling instantly spread through his mind. His mind cleared, and he felt much more comfortable. The clearer his mind was, that painful feeling also became clearer. All Nian Bing could do now was to clench his teeth and endure. Just as Nian Bing fell into the abyss of pain, Halogen on the side finally woke up from his cultivation. He only had a rough feeling of everything that happened outside. He knew that Nian Bing was in trouble, but at the critical moment, he couldn't help at all. Fortunately, his willpower was extremely strong. He didn't go berserk because of the changes in the outside world. When Halogen just woke up from his cultivation, he immediately looked for Nian Bing. However, the first thing he saw was the giant headless corpse. The giant corpse was too eye-catching. Halogen was shocked. When he saw the green blood flowing out of the giant corpse, he knew that this monster was dead. Sucking in a breath of cold air, Halogen murmured, "Heavens! Isn't this a green-eyed serpent? This was not its habitat, so why would it come here? Who killed it? It can't be Nian Bing, right?" His gaze turned, and he finally saw Nian Bing's appearance. Although Nian Bing's body was covered with green scales, her appearance didn't change. Halogen was stunned for a moment. In a flash, he came in front of Nian Bing. He also hadn't seen such a change. When he saw Nian Bing's current appearance, he couldn't help but frown. He didn't know what happened, but in his opinion, that green-eyed serpent was not something that Nian Bing could deal with. However, the green-eyed serpent was clearly dead. To be able to kill a green-eyed serpent in such a short time, even a master at the level of a king god wouldn't be able to do it. Could it be that a true god came here? That shouldn't be the case. Those true gods rarely left their own territories. Heavens! It can't really be Nian Bing, can it? Although he was puzzled, Halogen could see that Nian Bing was currently in a state of cultivation. She wasn't rashly helping him, but was carefully sensing the current state of Nian Bing. Through careful probing with his duki, he found that Nian Bing's body seemed to be going through a mysterious and evolving process. Not only were scales attached to her skin, even the veins and flesh in her body were constantly changing. The aura of death didn't weaken in the process, but her body was still undergoing earth-shattering changes. Halogen didn't know what exactly had changed, but he faintly felt that this wasn't a bad thing. After discovering this, Halogen finally relaxed. Since Nian Bing was cultivating, then he could only wait. Looking back at the corpse of the green-eyed serpent, Halogen's simple and honest face revealed a glimmer of desire. "Good stuff. It's really good stuff. I've long heard that the meat of the green-eyed serpent is the most delicious of all the magical beasts, and its scales are ranked in the top 3 in terms of defense. Such a good thing, how can I let it go?" While thinking, the black battle axe was already in his hand. In a few steps, he came to the side of the green-eyed serpent and began to move. Nian Bing naturally didn't know what was happening outside. Her brain was in a semi-conscious state because of the intense pain, and she was forced to wake up again and again by the aura of ice magic. Every time she went through a reincarnation cycle, it was as if she had walked in a circle in hell. The repeated pain made her spirit suffer. If it wasn't for the experience of cultivating in the space teleportation, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to endure this kind of pain. Minutes and seconds passed. Even Nian Bing herself didn't know how many times she was on the verge of fainting. Every time she made a choice, it was unusually difficult. After all the pain would disappear when she was unconscious. In the face of such a difficult choice, the longing in her heart made her stand up again and again. As long as she thought of her parents and the 3 girls waiting for her, the intense pain would become a lot weaker. In order to be able to return alive, she was almost crazy to endure. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, the faint green aura gradually weakened. The green light gradually merged with the 7-colored light in her mind and returned to her spirit. But now, his spiritual power had changed again. The original 7 main stars had disappeared, turning into 7 rotating star clusters with countless tail flames. The star clusters seemed to be made up of countless light spots that were constantly rotating, and the red and blue light spots in the center were constantly fusing and dispersing as they rotated. The 7 star clusters were not big, but if one were to spread their spiritual power throughout the entire Tian-Yen acupoint, they would be able to see 7 star clusters. After these star clusters were formed, the Tian-Yen acupoint no longer had a trace of space, and was completely filled with the 7-colored light spots. As the pain gradually disappeared, Nian Bing's tense spirit finally relaxed. The feeling of comfort replaced the pain. He finally got through it. Looking at the huge sea of spirit, even he admired himself. If he could get through this kind of difficulty, what else could he not do? While thinking, he slowly opened his eyes. The world in front of him suddenly changed. He rubbed his eyes, confirming that he didn't see wrongly. The Tianyan acupoint didn't open, but what appeared in front of him was no longer the same world as before. The air was completely filled with all kinds of subtle magic elements. Some magic elements were gently floating, some magic elements were fiercely rubbing against each other. Even if they were of the same type, the situation between them was completely different. God! What's going on? Why can I see this with my naked eyes? Nian Bing didn't understand, but he wasn't happy because of this situation. No matter who it was, who would be happy to see a sky full of light spots when they opened their eyes? It was definitely the most painful thing to not be able to see the world around you clearly. As Nian Bing thought of this, the light spots in front of him suddenly disappeared, and everything returned to normal. Furthermore, he could see much clearer than before. Brother, you're finally awake. You slept for an entire day. What happened to you? How did you become a monster? Halogen's voice woke Nian Bing up from his shock. He lowered his head to look at his own body, and was immediately shocked by himself. There wasn't a single bit of skin exposed on his body, and the undead aura on his body seemed to have become stronger. That hard and thick jade-green armor was really there, and as his skin rubbed against each other, it made a slight clanging sound, as if it was made of metal. God! What happened to me? I don't know what happened? Nian Bing looked at himself with tears in his eyes. How did he become like this? Even if he went back alive, how could he face his wives? He raised his head and touched his face. His face wasn't spared, and was also covered in scales. It's over, I've really become a monster this time. Halogen appeared in front of Nian Bing in a flash, and looked at him curiously. He raised his hand and pinched Nian Bing's shoulder. Suddenly, a strong rebound force was produced, and his hand was shaken off. Such a strong defense. Nian Bing, if I'm not wrong, you seem to have evolved. What did you do? Nian Bing smiled bitterly and said, I'd rather not have this kind of evolution. If I go back like this, how can I face my family and friends? I didn't do anything. After I killed that monster, I ate a pearl that dropped from its head. What? Halogen cried out in alarm. His voice was like thunder, and it scared Nian Bing. Did you really kill the green-eyes serpent? How did you do it? You know, the green-eyes serpent is one of the 4 magical beasts in the godly continent. Even if it can't compare to the large number of serpents, a green-eyes serpent can fight against more than 50 serpents, and even destroy them. According to what you said, the green-eyes serpent you killed has already condensed a serpent pearl. I'm afraid it's at least 3,000 years old. You're really something, you even dared to eat a serpent pearl. I'm very curious, how can you not die? Nian Bing said unhappily, do you really want me to die? What is the green-eyes serpent? Is it very strong? I don't think so. At the beginning, it was very difficult to deal with, but I used my spiritual energy to attack it twice and its head exploded. Then, I got the serpent pearl you said. Halogen made a fainting gesture. I admire you, Nian Bing. I simply prostrate myself in admiration of you. You actually played the jade-eyed azure dragon to death just like that? This green-eyes serpent is not a normal magical beast. Its defense is definitely in the top 3 of all magical beasts. Even the strongest magic storm would not be able to do any damage to it. Although its movements are not very agile, but from its body size, it is already much stronger than normal magical beasts. Moreover, it can spit out earth arrows to attack enemies, and it can control soil and rocks, just like the natural earth magicians among you humans. It can be said to be the strongest existence among the earth magical beasts. Even the strongest of the king gods are not willing to face it, otherwise, even if they kill it, it will cause a lot of damage to their own cultivation. The most powerful part of this jade-eyed ancient dragon wasn't its defense or attack power. The most terrifying part was its eyes. Those were the only eyes of a magical beast that could release spiritual attack. You actually said that you used spiritual power to explode its head? Heavens! What kind of monster are you? Nian Bing laughed and said, Aren't I just a zombie? Maybe this big snake underestimated me, and was killed by me before it could use its real power. It can only blame its bad luck. Halogen was completely speechless. Such a top magical beast was actually defeated by Nianbing. He really could not accept it. Nianbing said, Halogen, you still haven't told me what the serpent pearl is. Is there any harm in eating it? I don't know. Halogen said unhappily. Chapter 171. Nianbing smiled and said, All right, I know my character is good and you are jealous of me. But you don't have to be like this. No matter what, we are still brothers. Halogen smiled bitterly and said, I really don't know. The dragon core of the green eyes serpent is extremely rare. The effect of the dragon core is the same as the effect of the gem on your Earth Awakening Melody Longevity Blade, and it is also a gem of the same grade. I never thought that someone would eat such a treasure. If we can use the green eyes serpent's dragon core as the core and add the scales on its body to make an armor, its defensive power would not be much worse than my dwarf mystic armor. Of course, the person who makes this armor must be one of our clansmen. If it falls into the hands of someone who doesn't know how to make it, it will only be a waste. Nianbing looked at his body helplessly and said, How would I know that this thing can't be eaten? If I knew it was such a good thing, I would have kept it for you. Anyway, I've already eaten it. Other than this layer of scales, there doesn't seem to be any harm. Let's go quickly. Otherwise, if we encounter another magic storm, our journey will be delayed. As he said that, he identified the direction and took the lead to fly forward. Looking at Nianbing's back, Halogen muttered, Magic storm? If that layer of scales on your body really has the same effect as the green eyes serpent, even if there is a magic storm, it won't be able to hurt you. As he said that, he moved his feet and chased after Nianbing, leaving behind a hazy afterimage. It was only during this journey that Nianbing truly experienced the physics and chemistry that Ma Luan had mentioned. His body seemed to be much lighter than before, and he could easily float a distance of 30 to 40 feet with just a simple push off the ground. Furthermore, he didn't feel exhausted at all. Through the perception of the outside world, he could actually catch up to Halogen in terms of speed, and even surpass him in terms of agility. Nianbing didn't pay much attention to the changes in his spiritual power. As he hurried, he pondered about how to get rid of his dark green scales. Due to the increase in Nianbing's speed, the two of them were able to travel much faster. In the blink of an eye, he had already dashed dozens of kilometers away. As they hurried along, they also encountered several waves of magical beasts. This time, Halogen finally saw Nianbing's terrifying attack method. Halogen's strength was already extremely strong, but he had to deal with the magical beasts one by one. Relying on his own Do-Chi and battle axe to disintegrate the demonic beasts, but when he saw Nianbing's attack, he completely gave up on attacking. Although the magical beasts that attacked them were not too powerful, Nianbing's actions were too abnormal. Whenever a demonic beast attacked them, Nianbing's body would be surrounded by a layer of rainbow-colored air current. The rainbow-colored light flowed and split into countless tiny rays of light. Each ray of light pierced into the demonic beast's body. Then, there was no other possibility. The demonic beast would definitely explode and die. And their cores also entered Nianbing's stomach one by one. Of course, the current Nianbing wouldn't casually eat them anymore. He only ate them after asking Halogen and confirming that there was no problem. But, after eating the core of the green eyes serpent, he didn't eat the cores of other magical beasts. He no longer felt any obvious increase in his strength. I say, Nianbing, can we discuss something? Halogen asked tentatively. Nianbing was stunned. As he hurried forward, he looked at Halogen and said, What's wrong? We're brothers. If you have something to say, just say it. Halogen rubbed his hands and said, The next time we meet a demonic beast, don't use your abnormal attacks. With the strength of your body now, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with a demonic beast without using your spiritual power. Leave a few for me to satisfy my cravings. Nian Bing smiled and said, So it's like this. Well said, no problem. The next time there are demonic beasts, I'll leave them to you. I'm happy to be free. At this time, Nian Bing was in a good mood. Although those scales affected his appearance, but his body was full of strength and endless spiritual power made him feel that his strength had increased greatly. When he attacked those demonic beasts, he didn't have to worry about the consumption of his spiritual power. After every attack, the 7 vortexes in his Tian Yen acupoint would rotate slightly and immediately restore his spiritual power. Since there was such a method to save energy, why would he use his body to attack? Halogen shook his head helplessly and said, You're really a pervert. You even eat the cores of demonic beasts. Sai, looking at you, you don't look like you're from the Yangon continent. Nian Bing asked doubtfully, Why do you say that? Halogen said, Do you still need to ask? How could ordinary humans adapt to the environment of the godly continent so easily? I see that you're more adapted than those gods. I really have to hand it to you. Nian Bing smiled and said, So it's because of this. Actually, those demonic beasts' cores are made of energy. You can say that it's the core of their bodies. You can eat some later, there shouldn't be any problems. Halogen shook his head and said, Forget it, I don't have such good digestive abilities like you. Don't forget, you're a zombie. Zombies have a very strong absorption ability for anything physical. Moreover, your body is so strong that you're not afraid of the impact of the demonic beast's cores. It's just that I don't understand now, how did you absorb it? That dragon core of the green eyes serpent. Logically speaking, with your body's strength, it shouldn't be able to withstand such a large impact of energy. It's because you absorbed the dragon core of the green eyes serpent that you can eat the cores of other demonic beasts without any scruples. Nian Bing smiled bitterly and said, These are the questions I wanted to ask you. Why are you asking me? Whatever, I'll eat whatever I can. Increasing my strength by a bit will increase my chances when we reach Death God Waterfall, right? Actually, even Nian Bing himself didn't know that the reason he could absorb the dragon core of the green eyes serpent was mainly because of his strong mental strength and willpower, but at the same time, it had a lot to do with his body. No matter how strong his willpower was, if the pain came from both his mental and physical world at the same time, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. However, the body of a zombie made him unable to feel physical pain at all. Another reason was that his body had been modified by the dragon soul. Although the green eyes serpent was strong, it also belonged to the dragon family and was a super variant of the earth dragon. Nian Bing's body had been modified by the dragon soul of the mutant dragon Oscar, so the rejection of the green eyes serpent's dragon core was very small. Therefore, he was able to safely absorb the dragon core of the green eyes serpent. The red head rope of Nian Bing's strength also increased Halogen's confidence by a lot. Seeing Nian Bing's abnormal evolution, he now somewhat believed the god of life's vision. Perhaps this abnormal human really did have a way to safely enter Death God Waterfall. The two of them kept moving forward, and in the distance, a green mountain gradually appeared in front of them. The height of this mountain is not as high as the Red Mountain where the Zephyrs lived before, but it covers a much wider area. The dark green mountain body appears to Beta Green Mountain was very solid, and there were no holes exposed. Nian Bing looked at the mountain with some doubt and said, This should be the third mountain. After crossing this, we should reach Death God Waterfall. Halogen, can we go around it like we did at Red Mountain? Halogen shook his head and said, That won't do. You still don't know, but actually, the so-called crossing 3 mountains is not really crossing the third mountain. I call it Green Mountain. The top of the mountain is circular, and no one knows where the water at the top of the mountain comes from, but I can tell you. The top of this mountain is the source of Death God Waterfall. If we want to reach Death God Waterfall, we have to reach the top of the mountain. From there, we can directly reach Death God Waterfall. Even if we take a detour, we still have to climb this mountain from other places. The process is the same. Nian Bing's heart stirred and said, "You mean to say that Death God Waterfall is at the top of this mountain? You can't be wrong, right? Could there be a waterfall behind this mountain? A waterfall that isn't a threat?" Halogen said unhappily, "In your dreams, how can there be such a cheap thing? I'm very familiar with the surrounding environment. Apart from Death God Waterfall, there are no other waterfalls within 1,000 miles. On the continent of gods, the most precious things are food and water. There is no water source that can be drunk directly on the continent. What we drink is some filthy water that flows out from the cracks of the mountain, and can only be drunk after it has been purified. How can we be as extravagant as you, carrying so much clean water in your spatial ring? Of course, you don't need to drink water. However, zombies seem to need to drink blood, but I don't see you drinking blood." Nian Bing said with a smile, "Didn't I eat the inner cores of magical beasts? Those things are enough to replenish my body. Sai, do you think I want to be like this? I'm a chef. Making and tasting food is my greatest pleasure. Now all these pleasures are gone." Halogen's face showed a trace of seriousness and said, "All right, let's not talk about this first. Let's think about how to climb this mountain." Along the way, other than when they encountered a large number of enemies attacking at the same time, this was the first time Nian Bing saw Halogen reveal such an expression. Her heart trembled, and she immediately understood that this green mountain was definitely not ordinary. Halogen said, "This green mountain is called one of the 5 great forbidden areas on the continent of gods. It's as famous as the territory of the 4 great gods. One can imagine the dangers within. Of course, this danger is mainly reflected in Death God Waterfall. That is the main reason why this place is called a forbidden area. However, in the surroundings of this forbidden area, there are also hidden threats. Just the magical beasts of the dark element alone are many, including one of the 4 great magical beasts, the Amaterasu, who is known as the guardian of Death God Waterfall." Nian Bing frowned slightly and said, "Amaterasu? What's that? The name is not bad." Halogen said, "Amaterasu is the head of the 4 most powerful magical beasts on the continent of gods. Its strength is even greater than that of Jabi and the Green Eyes Serpent. I've only seen its appearance once from afar. The reason why its name is pleasant to hear is because it has the most beautiful appearance among the magical beasts. If you only look at its appearance, I'm afraid no one would think that it is the most ferocious magical beast." At this point, Halogen's eyes revealed a trace of fear. Nian Bing said disapprovingly, "Magical beasts are magical beasts in the end. We just have to avoid facing it head-on." Halogen shook his head and said, "How can it be so easy? As the guardian of Death God Waterfall, although there is only one Amaterasu, it has wisdom that surpasses humans. Its appearance is that of a bird with colorful wings and feathers, but its head is completely black. Its body can emit a faint fragrance. This kind of bird can transform into the appearance of a human. It is said that it already has the strongest power in the world of darkness, and Death God Waterfall is its source. Even the 4 true gods can't do much to it. Unless the entire continent of gods is destroyed, they can't really kill this Amaterasu." At this point, he looked deeply at Nian Bing and said word by word, "In other words, although this Amaterasu is on par with the other 3 magical beasts, its strength is far greater than the other 3. Nian Bing couldn't be more familiar with the strength of a true god. Halogen actually said that Amaterasu was comparable to a true god. Ling Nian Bing was immediately dumbfounded. With such a thing guarding Death God Waterfall, would she still be able to obtain the fruits? Halogen sighed and said, "It is because of Amaterasu's existence that I was very surprised when I heard that you wanted to come here to harvest the fruits. I really don't understand why the God of Life would let you come here. Don't tell me she sent you here to die?" Hearing Halogen's words, Nian Bing's thoughts flashed, and a thought flashed in her mind, Perhaps Cow let me come here because I am a zombie? Although that Amaterasu is powerful, it might not necessarily harm the other creatures of darkness here. Otherwise, you wouldn't have told me that there are several kinds of creatures of darkness on this green mountain. Therefore, although Amaterasu is powerful, it is not tyrannical. Halogen, I have decided. You go back now, I will go up the mountain alone. Halogen was anxious, and hurriedly said, What do you mean? Let me tell you, Amaterasu is powerful, not because we are afraid of it. Since I have accompanied you here, I will naturally follow you to take a look. With the two of us together, even if we can't defeat it, we might have a chance to escape. Nian Bing shook her head, saying, Of course I don't think you are afraid of it, but there is really no need for you to go up with me. Cow let me come here, she must have considered my strength. Since she let me come, she must have some confidence. Therefore, I must go up and try. If you follow me, the two of us may be trapped. Hearing Nian Bing's words, Halogen couldn't help but hesitate. But how can I be at ease if you go up alone? Smiling slightly, Nian Bing's eyes revealed a trace of sincerity. Believe me, since Amaterasu is so powerful, even if you go with me, once it goes berserk, we will not be able to contend against it. As the saying goes, choose the lesser of two evils. Besides, I still have a chance alone. Don't people believe in the God of life? Go back, my brother. If I don't go back in 10 days, it proves that I am done for. You don't have to think too much, just stick to your belief. If I don't go back, those 6 swords will be given to you dwarves. I believe that these swords can also play a role in your hand. Halogen looked deeply at Nian Bing and extended his right hand. Nian Bing raised her hand and shook it with him. Go, I have confidence in myself. You brought me here and told me this, it is already very useful to me. Didn't you say that I am a pervert? Maybe I will do even more perverted things when I see Amaterasu. Halogen was not a pretentious person. He looked deeply at Nian Bing. Good brother, I know you are thinking for me. Well, I will listen to you. I will wait for your good news in the Holy Mountain. You must come back. At this point, he patted Nian Bing's shoulder with his left hand and held Nian Bing's right hand tightly with his right hand. Only then did he let go of his hand and turned back to the way he came. If Halogen was alone, even if Nian Bing objected, he would definitely accompany Nian Bing to climb the Green Mountain and face Amaterasu together. However, Nian Bing's words just now made him think of his mother. He still had his mother to take care of. If he died, as the only dwarf in his prime on the Holy Land, then who would take care of his mother and people? Thinking of this, he said goodbye to Nian Bing against his will. However, his rough face was already covered with tears when he left. Although Halogen had only known Nian Bing for 3 days, during these 3 days, Nian Bing had unreservedly given all the food she brought with her to the dwarves, giving them hope and a more sincere belief. All of this was a great kindness to the dwarves. However, Halogen was very filial. For his mother, he had no choice but to leave. He kept telling himself, Nian Bing's everything was arranged by the God of life, but even so, his heart was still very sad. Seeing Halogen leave, Nian Bing calmed down and raised her head to look at the wide and tall mountain in front of her. The green mountain in front of her didn't turn green because of plants. It could be said that on the Holy Land, except for the realm of life she had seen, there was no place for plants to grow. There was no place suitable for plants to grow. The reason why the green mountain in front of him was green was because the rocks that formed the mountain were originally green. It was a very dark green. When the sunlight that passed through the dark clouds was not strong, it could even be seen as black. Smiling slightly, Nian Bing's eyes revealed a faint light. She didn't know what she was about to face, but, since she had already come here, she wouldn't shrink in the slightest. Amaterasu, then let me see your existence. With a flash of light in his left hand, the demon-devouring blade appeared in his hand. The black blade flashed, and combined with her own undead aura, The rich dark element formed a circle around her body without the deliberate control of her spiritual power. At this moment, the demon-devouring blade suddenly began to vibrate slightly. The vibrations weren't strong, but every time it trembled, it emitted a layer of faint black mist. It gave Nian Bing a feeling of excitement. Putting the demon-devouring blade in front of her chest, she looked at the narrow blade that didn't reflect any light. Feeling the surging dark aura on it, Nian Bing said to herself, "Old friend, this time it's up to you to climb the mountain. Your companions aren't here, only you can protect me." The demon-devouring blade let out a soft hum, as if it was trying to tell Nian Bing something. It raised its head again, and a strong divine light appeared in its eyes. Nian Bing floated up and headed for the peak of Green Mountain like a leaf. The surroundings were silent. In order to ensure her own safety, Nian Bing fully opened her spiritual power, and the scene of various magical elements appeared in front of her again. As soon as she entered the range of the Green Mountain, she immediately felt that her whole body was full of power. All kinds of negative energies were constantly gathering in her body, and her zombie-like body was crazily absorbing evil, dark, death, resentment, and other kinds of aura. Through her eyes, Nian Bing saw that it was completely a vast expanse of gray and black. In the range of the Green Mountain, there were no other magical elements at all, only evil and dark. To other creatures, the Green Mountain was definitely a place of death, but to all kinds of undead and dark creatures, it was definitely a place of feng shui. The dark energy in her body continued to rise under the constant nourishment, as if it was about to burst out at any time. Her body was filled with almost unlimited power. Every time her body soared in the air, she could feel that the little bit of energy that she had used was completely replenished. Nian Bing thought to herself, if a large amount of dark energy was gathered on this Green Mountain that was suitable for navigation, their combat power would probably be doubled. No wonder Halogen said that Amaterasu could even compete with the four true gods. Under the special conditions of the Green Mountain, such a situation was very likely to happen. Just as Nian Bing was feeling everything in the Green Mountain, she had already reached the halfway point of the Green Mountain at a speed that was difficult to be seen with the naked eye. The closer she got to the peak, the stronger the evil aura became. Although these dark and evil auras Ling Nian Bing felt that she was full of power, at the same time, these negative energies also aroused her zombie desires, and her heart was filled with bloodlust. If not for Nian Bing using her powerful spiritual power to suppress those dark desires, she was afraid that she would have already roared out loud. But even so, the death energy in her body surged again and again, greatly increasing her vigilance. Dark energy was a double-edged sword. While it increased one's strength, there was also the possibility that it could backfire at any time. Nian Bing understood that the first thing she had to do was to make sure that she was clear-headed. Just as she sensed the increase in her vigilance, Nian Bing's spiritual power, which was much stronger than before, suddenly discovered a slight change in the air. Not far from the mountain, she felt an evil aura, which was not the energy of the Green Mountain itself, because the aura attached to the Green Mountain itself was a balanced fluctuation, constantly increasing with the height of the mountain. The evil aura itself was much stronger, and with Nian Bing's spiritual power, it was easy for her to detect this factor. Nian Bing was not too worried, because she knew that she might have encountered a dark creature, but she did not know if it was Amaterasu who was guarding the Death God waterfall. The speed of her body's growth slowed down a little. The slender devil-devouring blade in her hand pointed forward, and her spiritual power spread out, locking onto the target like a large net. Nian Bing did not unleash any substantial spiritual energy. Even though that was the best way to unleash the full potential of his spiritual energy, the energy glow of the substantial spiritual energy was too obvious. It was not as good as the invisible spiritual energy. But with his current level of spiritual power, even if he did not use any real spiritual power, it was still extremely terrifying. When his spiritual power firmly locked onto the opponent, he could clearly sense the opponent's form. It was a monster about 4 feet long, and from the feedback of his spiritual power, it was hiding behind a huge rock, and at the same time, watching him. Nian Bing felt that the monster's body shape was somewhat familiar, and its chubby appearance was somewhat similar to the dark demon rat. But its huge head was far from the dark demon rat's. Just as Nian Bing was about to use his spiritual power to stimulate the monster and look for an opportunity to attack, the devil-devouring blade in his hand suddenly changed. A circle of black light emitted from the devil-devouring blade's hilt, and the hilt suddenly became abnormally hot. Nian Bing let out a cry of surprise, because the burning feeling went straight through his spiritual power, and almost subconsciously, he immediately let go of the devil-devouring blade's hilt. A light flashed, and a faint black light was emitted from the devil-devouring blade's hilt. In the blink of an eye, it condensed in front of Nian Bing, and it was the shadow puppet. Its right hand reached forward slightly, and it grabbed the devil-devouring blade in its hand, without waiting for Nian Bing's order. It had already turned into a faint black fog and floated out, circling behind the rock. That's right. How could I forget about the shadow puppet when I was adventuring in the Death God waterfall? Seeing its appearance, Nian Bing was not surprised, but happy. After all, although the shadow puppet often escaped from his control, everything the shadow puppet did was beneficial to him. Perhaps it was because the dark aura on the devil-devouring blade was too strong that it formed the blade's soul. It was a good thing that the blade itself had spirituality. Let him deal with the monster, and he would find another opportunity to help. At the thought of this, Nian Bing leaped up and floated to a large rock at the side. He looked in the direction that the shadow puppet had rushed out from. A light flashed and an angry roar sounded. Then, a huge body suddenly rose from behind the rock. Seeing the figure fly out, Nian Bing was shocked. The body was about 4 feet long, and it was almost spherical. Its head was also spherical, but it was a few sizes smaller than the body. Looking at the way it flew, it looked like a round meatball on a huge piece of fat meat. Its 2 huge ears, each of which was over 10 feet long, flapped continuously, bringing its body high up into the sky, dodging a beam of light that was slashed out by the shadow puppet's devouring devil blade. Nian Bing was too familiar with the appearance of this monster. Wasn't this monster the same as Kitty's little pink pig? But it was many times bigger, and its body was not pink, but gray. Damn, the flying divine pig! It can fly even though it's so big. The flying divine pig in the air seemed to have heard Nian Bing's voice, and its huge nose that matched its body made an angry roar. Of course, although it was a powerful magical beast, its roar was not much different from that of an ordinary pig, but it was much louder. Looking at the appearance of this magical beast, Nian Bing felt a little funny. What a flying divine pig! Could it be that it was related to Kitty's little pink pig, Guan? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but shout to the shadow puppet, "Be careful of this fat pig's unique skill. It might be some kind of beast blood boil." Nian Bing had seen Guan use beast blood boil before, and it was very powerful. In terms of attack power, little pink pig Guan was the most powerful among all of Kitty's pets. The flying celestial boar in front of him was clearly stronger than Guan by more than 1 level. If it was the one who used beast blood boil, the power would be unimaginable. The shadow puppet didn't seem to have heard Nian Bing's words, and its body floated up like a shadow. At this moment, Nian Bing's mental strength suddenly fluctuated violently, and he could clearly see the changes happening to the shadow puppet. Its body, which was formed from the condensation of the dark elements with Xiantian Qi as its foundation, actually became illusory in an instant. On the other hand, the demon-devouring blade was raised high, and the dark energy that was more than 10 feet long rapidly shrank to a foot in radius. Its speed instantly doubled, and it rushed towards the flying divine boar's head. The flying divine pig seemed to know how powerful it was. Although it didn't stop snarling, its huge body curled up, and it really turned into a meatball. Its body quickly flipped in the air, and its huge ears covered the outside. A layer of gray energy spread out from its body, and it suddenly crashed towards the shadow puppet. Seeing this, Nian Bing wasn't worried at all. His mental strength was locked onto the flying divine pig's body. If the shadow puppet couldn't resist, he would immediately make a move. However, from the looks of it, the shadow puppet didn't have any trouble resisting the attack. Although the flying divine pig's attack covered a large area, the shadow puppet's greatest strength was its speed and agility. It was impossible for the flying divine pig to cause any damage to the shadow puppet. Just as Nian Bing was thinking about the possible directions the shadow puppet could dodge, a scene that left him at a loss of whether to laugh or cry happened. Surprisingly, the shadow puppet didn't dodge the flying divine pig's attack. Its charging body suddenly came to a halt in midair, and it raised the demon-devouring saber above its head. It suddenly emitted a black light, but the light wasn't aimed at the flying divine pig. Instead, it was aimed at the air above the flying divine pig. Nian Bing was puzzled. What was the shadow puppet trying to do? The answer was revealed at the same time Nian Bing was puzzled. The flying divine pig's speed was extremely fast due to its huge weight, but the shadow puppet's movement was just slightly faster than it. The black light in the air suddenly grew bigger, and a huge body no smaller than the flying divine pig suddenly appeared in midair. It was Sweetie Mouse's mother, the super dark demon mouse that had evolved to Tier 5. Chapter 172. The appearance of the dark demon rat had obviously startled the flying divine pig. However, everything had happened too quickly, and it had no time to react. The dark demon rat's attack could be said to be unique. It retracted its 4 relatively small claws and curled up like the flying divine pig. However, its body did not rotate. Its pointy head was facing up, and its pair of small eyes were looking straight ahead. Its fat butt was facing down, and its entire body was emitting a layer of black light. It actually sat down with its butt facing down. The dark demon rat sat down very quickly, and it wasn't light either. When it got close to the shadow puppet, the flying divine pig just happened to crash into it. Ling Nian Bing's big, black butt came into close contact with the flying divine pig's round body. The 2 equally fat bodies fell from the sky like 2 giant meatballs and crashed into the side of the green mountain. The huge explosion sent Nian Bing flying from where he was standing. Luckily, he was prepared. He used his power of the will to protect his ears, so he didn't suffer any damage. When Nian Bing entered the green mountain, he carefully inspected the rock structure of the mountain. Apart from being filled with a huge amount of dark energy, the rocks were also extremely hard. They were at least twice as hard as the normal black rocks on the continent of gods. However, the dark demon rat and the flying divine pig's combined strength was simply too terrifying. The flying divine pig's spinning body changed direction because of the dark demon rat's big butt. Combined with the dark demon rat's energy and the weight of both of them, the impact sent the flying divine pig's huge body crashing into the green mountain. 2/3 of its body sank into the mountain, and cracks kept spreading out from the crater it created. The cracks only stopped after a few hundred meters. This time, the flying divine boar was truly enraged. Its huge body struggled and jumped out of the depression. Looking at the dark demon rat that was still rising in the air, it let out a slightly different roar from its mouth. An incomparably large gray stream of air condensed around its body. The gray stream of air looked very strange, and during the process of condensing, strange gray vortexes appeared on the flying divine boar's body. The center of these vortexes was black, and the originally lazy black eyes of the flying divine boar had turned blood red. As it let out a low roar, its fat and protruding nose constantly exhaled hot air. Nian Bing's heart tightened. He immediately used his power of the will to notify the shadow puppet. He knew that the flying divine pig was about to use a skill similar to Little Pink Pig Guan's beast blood boil. Such a big pig, how strong was its attack? Nian Bing didn't know, and he didn't want to know. Although the divine flying boar's movements weren't fast, and it seemed to be very lazy, The strength of the dark aura on its body was far beyond Nian Bing's understanding. The enormous gray energy had already condensed in the blink of an eye. Following that, the divine flying boar lifted its 2 front hooves, and its 2 large ears opened like a fan. A huge gray stream of air rushed into the sky, rushing towards the dark demon rat that had already begun to descend. The stream of air that it released was very strange. Its shape was exactly the same as its body, and it was actually a complete body of energy. Nian Bing couldn't help but be shocked by the immense pressure that came from the divine flying boar, even though he wasn't facing it directly. He knew that even if his body had undergone many transformations, he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand such a ferocious attack. The shadow puppet's intelligence was far beyond Nian Bing's imagination. When the flying divine pig released its full power attack, the dark demon rat in the sky disappeared without a trace. Although the dark demon rat was injured by the recoil of the flying divine pig's body, it didn't suffer any substantial damage. When the flying divine pig released its strongest attack, the dark demon rat was recalled by the shadow puppet just like that. Seeing the dark demon rat disappear, Nian Bing heaved a sigh of relief. However, before he could retract his suspense, he immediately tensed up again. Although the dark demon rat disappeared, the shadow puppet suddenly appeared in midair and took over the dark demon rat's position. The energy pig was now filled with a dense dark aura. It could definitely be called a pig of death. Although Nian Bing's psychic energy was strong, he could only attack the flying divine pig's body. It was too late to stop the energy pig. A miracle happened once again on the shadow puppet. Its body that was calmly floating in midair fused with the energy pig's enormous dark aura. Under the intense impact of the energy pig, the shadow puppet's body also disappeared in the gray aura. A miracle. Of course, this was not a miracle. If the shadow puppet died just like that, how could it be called a miracle? Just as Nian Bing's heart sank and the flying divine pig was roaring excitedly, the energy pig in midair changed. If the enemy was too strong and returned its full strength attack to it, the flying divine pig would not be so afraid. However, it saw a scene that it never wanted to see again. Just as it was excitedly snorting, the energy pig in midair suddenly lost contact with its body. In the next moment, the gray energy pig instantly turned black and shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. It condensed at the center of its body. The flying divine pig roared angrily. Under the influence of the aura, its huge body trembled and shrank in size. Even the gray aura around its body became much weaker. The black aura quickly shrank and reformed into a human form. A slender black blade appeared out of thin air. With a flash of light, the figure appeared in front of the flying divine pig. It was the shadow puppet who had returned to his human form. At this time, the shadow puppet had changed again. Its body did not have the illusory feeling that an energy body should have. Compared to Nian Bing, who was not far away, it was black, while Nian Bing was green. Other than the color difference and the extra scales on Nian Bing's body, there was no other difference between the two of them. Although Nian Bing found it strange that there was an additional shadow puppet, at the same time, she could clearly sense that the shadow puppet had become much stronger than before. It was so strong that she could not even judge its strength. The shadow puppet did not look at Nian Bing. The demon-devouring blade in its hand had already pointed at the flying divine pig's forehead. A gray stream of air flowed out of the flying divine pig's body uncontrollably into the shadow puppet. The energy kept pouring out, and the shadow puppet was in an extremely comfortable position. Apart from the demon-devouring blade in its right hand that was pointing at the flying divine pig, the rest of its body was completely stretched out. The feeling of having a solid body became even more obvious. Nian Bing observed the shadow puppet through her celestial eye acupoint. She discovered a shocking fact from the shadow puppet. The current form of the shadow puppet was actually somewhat similar to the god of life, Cao. The difference was that Cao possessed the energy of life, while the shadow puppet possessed the energy of darkness, an energy filled with evil. Of course, The strength of the shadow puppet's energy was still a far cry from that of Cao. However, the completely condensed and unfathomable form of energy was similar to the enormous life force of the god of life, Cao. Ling Yanbing could not help but feel a little worried at the same time. Was it really a good idea for the shadow puppet to continue developing like this? From the looks of it, the shadow puppet seemed to be able to absorb the energy of all dark creatures. If it continued to grow, what would happen when its dark energy reached a certain saturation point? While Nian was pondering, the flying divine pig could not take it anymore. Although the Green Mountain was a great land of nourishment for dark creatures, it could not withstand the crazy absorption of its energy by the shadow puppet. The flying divine pig struggled with all its might, but it had just unleashed its most powerful attack. Although the shadow puppet's energy was not as strong as the flying divine pig, it had already surpassed the flying divine pig after absorbing the flying divine pig's energy. The flying divine pig could only watch as its hard-earned energy was continuously absorbed by the shadow puppet. The flying divine pig stared at the shadow puppet with a pleading look in its small eyes. The fat on its body kept shaking, as if it would be paralyzed at any moment. The shadow puppet let out a sharp shriek. The demon-devouring saber in its hand unleashed a black net of light, locking onto the flying divine pig's huge body. Its dark red eyes flickered continuously, as if it was communicating with the flying divine pig. The flying divine pig's body stopped trembling as its energy was no longer being absorbed. It nodded its huge pig head repeatedly with a pleading look in its eyes. The shadow puppet made its move. The demon-devouring saber flickered a few times, and the black saber light intertwined into a strange symbol on the flying divine pig's forehead. The flying divine pig's body trembled, and it floated into the air. Just like the dark demon rat, it was absorbed into the black gem on the demon-devouring saber's hilt. Seeing this scene, Nian couldn't help but widen her eyes. No wonder they said that the demon-devouring saber was her only supra-divine weapon. Even if she attacked with her mental strength, she might not be able to defeat such a powerful flying divine pig. However, in front of the shadow puppet, it didn't seem to be able to resist at all. Not only was a large amount of its dark energy sucked away, but it was also directly subdued by the shadow puppet. In fact, it wasn't as easy as Nian imagined for the shadow puppet to subdue the flying divine pig. This flying divine pig had already evolved into its Tier 8 form, which was also its final form. Its strength was so strong that it was even stronger than the green-eyed Viridian Jia that Nian had killed. The shadow puppet's energy was a few levels lower than the flying divine pig's. Although its ability was very special, it couldn't directly absorb the flying divine pig's energy. At that moment, when the flying divine pig launched its energy attack, it fell into the shadow puppet's trap. If the flying divine pig had kept its dark energy hidden, the shadow puppet wouldn't have been able to do anything to it. However, as soon as the flying divine pig released its energy, the shadow puppet immediately seized the opportunity. Using the various circumstances and the demon-devouring saber, the shadow puppet completely sucked the fat flying divine pig into its saber and turned it into a summoned beast like the dark demon rat. The same thing happened again. When the shadow puppet finished subduing the flying divine pig, it immediately put the demon-devouring saber back into its body and returned to Nian side. Nian mental connection with the flying divine pig was re-established, and she was able to control this puppet of hers again. Nian wasn't in a hurry to recall the shadow puppet. Instead, she stared at this body of energy that looked exactly like her. A saber soul? Is it really just a saber soul? If that's the case, isn't its intelligence a little too terrifying? Even if I wanted to use that kind of battle tactic, I wouldn't be able to do anything like that. However, this shadow puppet was able to fully utilize its own abilities to create all kinds of situations for me. The shadow puppet didn't have any expression on its face. Nian hesitated for a moment before recalling it. When the demon-devouring saber returned to her hand, She could clearly feel that the dark energy within this saber had become more condensed. That surging dark energy was actually converging around the gem on the saber's hilt. What a good saber! What a good saber! I wonder if the shadow puppet will still be able to unleash this much power when it's facing Amaterasu. After dealing with the flying divine pig, Nian Bing didn't expend any energy at all. She even got to watch an exciting battle. She wasn't in a hurry to ascend the Green Mountain. Instead, she carefully observed her surroundings. She knew that with the strength of the flying divine pig's energy, there shouldn't be any other dark magical beasts living around here. At this moment, this was the safest place on the Green Mountain. Nian Bing drifted over to the cave left behind by the celestial boar. He couldn't help but feel astonished when he saw the huge crater in the ground. Wide cracks continued to spread in all directions, and the aura of darkness within these cracks was extremely strong. It was much stronger than all the places he had been to in the Green Mountain. As her body naturally absorbed more and more dark energy, Nian Bing's emerald scales revealed a faint layer of dark energy. The thirst for blood in her heart was even stronger. Fortunately, her spiritual power was strong enough to not be affected by the dark energy. Suppressing the thirst for blood in her heart, she let go of her body and mind and frantically absorbed the dark energy around her. Nian Bing was very confident in her spiritual power. Her Tian Yen acupoint had already formed a system of its own. The zombie's natural reaction couldn't affect her judgment at all. What she needed now was power, powerful power. Sitting cross-legged in the middle of the circular pit, she released her spiritual power. Her body was in a half-cultivating and half-vigilant state. She didn't know how to cultivate zombies, but she knew that for dark creatures like zombies, the stronger the negative energy in their bodies, the stronger their abilities would be. Although it was only the strength of their bodies, it was enough. Therefore, what he needed to do was to boldly absorb the dark aura that spewed out from the cracks into his body with the help of his mental power and merge it with his body. As she cultivated, Nian Bing couldn't help but feel a little envious of the shadow puppet. They were both absorbing dark energy, but it seemed to be easy for it to convert it into its own energy. However, she couldn't. Although they were both negative energy, her body had to go through continuous conversion. She had to completely convert the absorbed dark energy into her own energy before she could produce the conversion effect. This was much slower. This cultivation lasted for 3 days. When Ling Nian Bing stopped cultivating, she saw a strange scene. The many cracks that had appeared on the mountainside had already closed up. Even the depression created by the flying divine pig was slowly being pushed out. Her body was pushed out of the depression. Without the cracks, the density of the dark energy was naturally much lower. However, in these 3 days, Ling Nianbing still benefited a lot. The first thing she felt was the change in her strength. Her scale-covered body was filled with explosive physical strength. Now, she wanted to meet another flying divine pig and fight it with her own body. She wanted to see just how strong her body had become. Secondly, the changes also appeared on her scales. The emerald green scales had turned dark green, and the patterns had become more reasonable. However, the scales were thinner than before she started cultivating. The dark green scales even seemed a little transparent. She moved her body around. 3 days of cultivation didn't make her feel stiff at all. Although she was a zombie and didn't feel like a human, the feeling of being filled with strength greatly increased Ling Nianbing's confidence. She raised her head and looked at the back half of Green Mountain. Her body floated forward, and she lightly stepped on the cliff of Green Mountain with 1 foot. Her body flew diagonally, and in an instant she rose 500 feet. Her control of her strength was extremely subtle. As she spun, she turned into an arc and flew towards the top of Green Mountain. When she was close to the mountain, she took another step, and her body rose up. After 2 leaps, she had already risen 300 feet. Her speed was 1/3 faster than before she started cultivating.